My name is Abigail Smith, and I am 34 years old. 2 days ago, I woke up in a rural physical therapy ward after a 6-month coma. The nurse called me Jane Doe. She said I was brought in after a hit and run on Highway 280 with no ID and no visitors. I thought the worst thing that could happen was being forgotten by my own family. I was wrong. The worst thing was standing in the back of a packed Birmingham church 48 hours later, listening to my brother-in-law deliver my eulogy. They had not forgotten me. They had simply cashed in my $2 million life insurance policy and moved on. Welcome back to Edana Told Stories, where the truth always costs more than the lie. If you have ever been the person your family only values for what you provide, this story is for you. Drop a comment and tell me your age, and make sure to subscribe. The brass latch of the heavy oak doors clicked shut, severing the humid Alabama heat. Inside, the air conditioning chilled the damp skin on my neck. I stayed in the vestibule shadows, leaning my spine against the cold stone. The air smelled of stargazer lilies, a scent I have always hated because it smells like rot trying to be elegant. I looked down at my hands. In my left, I held a thick, glossy cardstock pamphlet. My own face stared back at me. It was a corporate headshot I took from my firm last year. The silver dates printed beneath the photograph marked a 34-year lifespan, ending precisely 6 months ago. My right thumb brushed the stiff edge of a plastic hospital band on my wrist. The black ink was slightly smeared, but highly legible. Doe Jane, State Trauma. At the marble pulpit, Harrison Croft adjusted the microphone. Beatrice's husband commanded the room with effortless Southern grace, his tailored charcoal suit absorbing the light. He is a wealthy attorney with political ambitions and a voice built for selling comfort. Abigail was more than my sister-in-law, Harrison told the hundreds of bowed heads. His baritone voice wavered a masterful touch of practiced grief. She was a brilliant mind, a dedicated actuary who saw the details the rest of us missed. She was a light taken from our family by a senseless tragedy. I listened to my own eulogy without blinking. My profession trained me to evaluate raw data, assess statistical risk, and locate fatal discrepancies in corporate ledgers. I spent my life calculating the exact dollar value of human existence for major firms. I knew exactly how long payouts took. I knew the friction of the probate process. Right now, the discrepancy was breathing, standing 70 feet away from the man delivering her final rites. The math did not add up. A $2 million policy does not clear in 6 months without an inside push. Just 48 hours prior, the scent of lilies did not exist. Instead, I inhaled the sharp, stinging reek of industrial bleach. I had awakened in Oak Haven Extended Recovery, a cinderblock facility 50 miles past the city limits. It is a place reserved for uninsured wards of the state. Water-stained ceiling tiles greeted my first conscious moments. A nurse in faded scrubs checked my vitals and offered a tired smile. "Welcome back to the world, Jane. We thought we lost you." "Jane." My throat managed only a dry rasp. The nurse filled the silence, supplying the timeline. 6 months in a coma. A hit and run on a dark stretch of highway. Paramedics found me with no identification, just a broken body left on the asphalt. I absorbed the information, my analytical brain organizing the variables. If a prominent, wealthy Mountain Brook family lost their eldest daughter, they would mobilize resources. Private investigators, statewide registry searches, press conferences. They would not allow her to languish as a Jane Doe in an underfunded rural clinic. Unless they never looked. Back in the church, Harrison finished his remarks and stepped down from the pulpit. In the front row, my sister Beatrice dabbed her eyes beneath a black lace veil. As she raised her hand, the overhead light caught the hard flash of a new diamond tennis bracelet resting against her wrist. Beside her sat our mother Vivian and our brother Nolan, wrapped in immaculate, expensive mourning attire. I stepped back into the deeper darkness of the vestibule. I did not cry out. I did not run down the center aisle to announce my survival to the people who had buried me. I simply stood in the shadows, watching the performance, and began to calculate the true cost of my death. 24 hours before I stood in the shadows of my own funeral, I stood at the iron gates of my mother's Mountain Brook estate. Getting there required signing myself out of the recovery clinic against medical advice. I convinced a skeptical cab driver that the wealthy woman living inside the brick walls would cover his $90 fare. I wore cheap gray sweatpants provided by a charity bin and slip-on shoes with zero traction. My joints ached with the stiff, hollow pain of a body that had not moved under its own power for half a year. Every step up the long, curving driveway sent a dull shock up my spine. The gravel crunched loud beneath my feet, marking my return to a world that had moved on without me. The estate stood exactly as I remembered it. Vivian Smith built her entire identity on this property. It is a sprawling colonial structure draped in manicured ivy, funded by my late father, and maintained by a delicate web of social expectations. I walked around to the side entrance. The heavy wooden door was unlocked, just like it always was on a weekday morning. I stepped inside. The kitchen smelled of fresh espresso and expensive lemon polish. My mother stood by the vast marble island. She wore a silk morning robe, her silver hair perfectly styled, even at 8 in the morning. She held her favorite bone china coffee cup in her right hand. When she turned and saw me standing in the threshold, the color drained from her cheeks. Her skin turned the shade of old parchment. She did not scream. She did not rush forward to hold the daughter she thought was lost forever. Her fingers just went slack. The china cup hit the marble floor. It fractured into dozens of jagged white splinters. Dark coffee splashed across the pristine stone and pooled around her bare feet. "That is not possible," she whispered. Her words carried no relief. They carried pure, primal fear. My brain runs on risk models and behavioral statistics. When an anomaly occurs, you isolate it. You look for the missing variable. A mother seeing her deceased child should exhibit shock, followed by overwhelming joy. Vivian exhibited only the shock, followed by a cold, creeping dread. Her eyes darted from my face to the doorway behind me, as if expecting the authorities to walk in next. I looked past her shoulder into the adjoining formal living room. A framed portrait of me sat on the mantelpiece, flanked by tall, unlit candles. Footsteps echoed from the hardwood hallway. Harrison walked into the kitchen, buttoning the cuffs of a crisp dress shirt. He stopped dead when he saw me. For a fraction of a second, the polished Southern lawyer slipped. I saw the raw, unfiltered panic underneath his tailored exterior. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darted to Vivian before the mask slammed back into place. "Abigail, you are alive," he said. His voice sounded hollow, echoing off the marble counters. He stepped forward, reaching out to grab my shoulders. As his arm extended, the kitchen lighting caught the heavy metal on his left wrist. A platinum Rolex day date. The retail price for that specific model hovers around $40,000. Harrison is a successful attorney, but he is also heavily leveraged with political campaign debts. He has spent the last 3 years complaining about the cost of Beatrice's lifestyle. A man drowning in campaign debt does not buy a $40,000 watch on a random Tuesday. The anomaly resolved itself into a clear, fatal equation. 6 months ago, I finalized a comprehensive life insurance policy. $2 million. I structured it meticulously, designating the trust to care for Vivian and my siblings in the event of an unexpected tragedy. Payouts require a death certificate. Death certificates require a body. The probate courts in Alabama are notoriously slow. A $2 million policy does not clear in 6 months without an inside push. Someone had to grease the wheels. Someone with legal connections and a desperate need for capital. If I am standing in the kitchen, who did they bury? And more importantly, what happens to them now that I am back? "You are in shock," Harrison said. He closed the distance between us and wrapped his hands around my upper arms. His grip was tight. His fingers dug into my biceps, hard enough to bruise the tender skin. "We need to get you sitting down. You should not be standing. You are fragile." I did not fight him. I let my shoulders slump, playing the part of the broken, confused victim. I needed time to process the variables. In my line of work, I evaluate fraud indicators for corporate accounts. The signs were identical. The forced calm, the physical blocking, the rapid attempt to control the environment. He steered me away from the main house before I could take another step. Vivian remained frozen by the marble island, staring at the broken china scattered across the floor. She never even said my name. The shattered porcelain felt like a physical representation of her pristine, aristocratic fiction breaking apart. Harrison guided me across the manicured lawn toward the detached guest house. The July air felt sudden and thin in my lungs. He unlocked the heavy door and pushed me inside the dim foyer. "You need rest," he said smoothly. His tone held the practiced calm he used on nervous clients. Medical trauma plays tricks on the mind. "I will call a private doctor. We have to be careful with your delicate state, Abigail. Stay in here until we figure out the best medical approach." He pulled the solid wooden door shut. A second later, I heard the distinct metallic slide of the deadbolt locking from the outside. I stood alone in the dark guest bedroom. The silence of the small house pressed against my ears. They did not want me back. A resurrected daughter is a financial disaster. I was a walking $2 million liability to these people. If I proved I was alive, the insurance firm would demand their money back. The fraud investigation would destroy Harrison's political career and leave Vivian facing federal charges. They needed me to remain dead. The lock on the door proved they were already calculating how to make that happen. I walked over to the guest house window and peered through the wooden blinds. Harrison stood on the patio talking frantically into his cell phone. He paced back and forth, his free hand running through his hair. He was initiating damage control. I knew my brother-in-law. He operated strictly on self-preservation. He would not hesitate to silence a threat to his reputation. I needed to move. I needed to understand the exact scope of the legal fiction they created. My actuary training taught me that you cannot dismantle a corrupt system from the inside until you understand how the ledger is balanced. I had to find a way out of this guest house. I had to reach a bank and test my own Social Security number to see just how thoroughly Harrison had erased my existence. If they owned the paperwork, they owned my life. I turned away from the window and scanned the room for anything I could use. The game had changed. I was no longer a patient recovering from a tragic accident. I was a ghost trapped in a house built on my own blood money, and the people upstairs were deciding whether to bury me for a second time. The deadbolt on the guest house door held firm. I tested the brass knob, letting the cold metal ground my racing thoughts. Harrison assumed a standard lock would contain a woman recovering from a severe medical trauma. He forgot I spent my teenage summers memorizing the blueprints of this entire property just to escape my mother's suffocating dinner parties. I navigated toward the narrow bathroom at the rear of the suite. The window above the porcelain sink featured an old latch mechanism my father installed decades ago. I pressed the base of my palm against the rusted metal and shoved upward. The pane yielded with a sharp scrape. Pushing the screen outward, I hoisted my stiff, aching body over the sill and dropped into the dense azalea bushes below. Thorns tore at my cheap charity bin sweatpants, but I ignored the sting. I kept my head down and moved through the shadowed perimeter of the estate, slipping out the wrought iron side gate. The walk into Mountain Brook Village tested the limits of my unhealed muscles. The July heat pressed down on my shoulders like a weighted blanket. Sweat dripped into my eyes, blurring the pristine, manicured lawns of my wealthy neighbors. None of them recognized the woman dragging her feet across the pristine sidewalks. Without my tailored suits and corporate posture, I was just a vagrant wandering through their exclusive zip code. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the local bank branch. The industrial air conditioning offered immediate relief, drying the damp hair plastered to my forehead. I approached the nearest open counter. A young teller with a crisp blue blazer and a bright silver name tag offered a polite, professional smile. "How can I assist you today?" she asked. I rested my trembling hands on the cool laminate counter. "I need to check the balance and withdraw funds from my primary checking account." "Certainly," the teller replied. "May I have your debit card and a valid photo identification?" I kept my voice steady, holding her gaze. I was involved in a severe auto accident. I lost my wallet and my purse in the wreckage. I just left the recovery clinic and I have 0 forms of physical identification. Can we verify my identity using my social security number and my security questions? Her smile faltered slightly, dropping into a practiced mask of corporate caution. I can look up the profile, but I will need a manager to authorize any physical withdrawal without an ID, ma'am. Please go ahead and recite the 9 digits. I gave her my social security number. The teller turned her attention to her dual monitors. Her manicured fingers danced across the keyboard. The keys produced a cold, hollow, click-clack sound, echoing in the quiet lobby. Each keystroke felt like a nail driven into a wooden lid. She hit the enter key. The screen blinked. The glow reflected off her wire-rimmed glasses. I watched her eyebrows knit together in deep confusion. She pressed another key. Her posture stiffened. "Ma'am," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "there must be a clerical error." "Read the screen to me," I instructed. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair, creating physical distance between us. "I cannot access the funds. The system has initiated a hard lock on this profile. The primary account holder, Abigail Smith, is flagged in the Federal Registry as deceased. The estate is currently in closed probate." Bureaucratic erasure. A clean, bloodless execution performed by algorithms and death certificates. "I am Abigail Smith," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat. The teller reached a hand toward the telephone sitting next to her terminal. "I need to call the branch manager," she murmured, "and perhaps the local authorities. Attempting to access the accounts of a deceased individual constitutes identity theft. If I stayed, she would summon the police. The police would detain a confused woman wearing hospital-issued clothing, claiming to be a dead millionaire. They would call the emergency contact listed in the local directory. They would call Harrison. He would have legal custody of me before sunset. I did not argue. I stepped back from the counter, turned on my heel, and walked out the glass doors before she even picked up the receiver. The heat hit my face again, but I felt entirely numb. Financial paralysis is a specific type of suffocation. Without a valid identity, I could not rent a car, book a hotel room, or hire independent legal counsel. I was a ghost, trapped in a society that requires paper proof of life. I had to return to the only place that offered shelter. I had to go back to the people who erased me. The journey back to the estate felt twice as long. I slipped through the side gate and moved quietly along the perimeter of the main house. As I passed the expansive bay windows of my father's old mahogany study, I heard the distinct clink of crystal glasses. I pressed my back against the brick facade and inched toward the cracked window pane. Vivian paced the length of the Persian rug. Her silk robe rustled with every frantic step. "What are we going to do, Harrison?" she demanded. The panic in her voice was raw and unfiltered. "She is sitting in the guest house. If she walks down the street and talks to a neighbor, the insurance company will find out. The fraud investigators will tear this family apart. I cannot go to a federal prison." Harrison sighed. The sound carried the smooth, terrifying patience of a predator assessing a trapped animal. "Drink your bourbon, Vivian, and lower your voice. We handle this quietly." How she countered. "She is breathing. She is coherent." "Is she?" Harrison asked. "Think about it, Vivian. The woman sustained catastrophic head trauma. She was in a coma for half a year. Who is to say her mind is intact?" I heard the slow, heavy sound of liquid pouring into a glass. "If she attempts to disrupt our lives," Harrison continued, "we make a single phone call to Dr. Sterling. He owes me a few favors from his malpractice suit. We request a discreet emergency evaluation. We tell him the trauma fractured her sanity. She is deeply confused, suffering from delusions, claiming an identity she read about in a newspaper. We place her under an involuntary psychiatric hold. She vanishes into a secure, private ward. We remain the grieving family, dealing with a tragic imposter." A chill radiated through my chest, freezing the marrow in my bones. It was a flawless strategy. An unhinged woman shouting conspiracy theories about her wealthy family faking her death sounds exactly like a paranoid schizophrenic. If I screamed, if I fought them with righteous anger, I would hand them the exact diagnostic proof they needed to lock me in a padded room forever. I pushed away from the brick wall and hurried across the lawn. I scrambled through the azaleas and pulled myself back through the narrow bathroom window, tumbling onto the tiled floor, just as I heard the heavy deadbolt turn on the front door. I scrambled to the edge of the mattress and sat down. I let my shoulders droop. I relaxed my facial muscles, allowing my mouth to hang slightly open. I forced my eyes to unfocus, staring blankly at the beige carpet. Harrison walked into the bedroom. He held a silver tray carrying a glass of water and a small white pill. "How are we feeling, Abigail?" he asked. His tone dripped with fake, gentle concern. I did not look at him. I stared at the carpet and slowly blinked. "My head hurts," I whispered, letting my voice tremble. "Everything feels hazy. Where is my father?" My father died 12 years ago. Asking for him was a calculated risk, a performance of profound cognitive damage. Harrison paused. A tight, satisfied smile crept onto his lips. "Your father passed away a long time ago, Abigail. You need to rest your mind. Take this mild sedative. It will help with the confusion." He set the tray on the nightstand. As he leaned forward, the heavy ring of keys clipped to his belt loop chimed together. My gaze shifted toward the metallic sound. Dangling next to his polished car key was a sleek, black, rectangular drive. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face slack. It was my encrypted actuarial USB token. It contained the proprietary algorithms I personally coded to manage my private offshore safety nets. Harrison must have taken it from my apartment when they cleared out my belongings. He kept it on his keychain as a victory trophy, a mocking keepsake of the brilliant sister-in-law he outsmarted. He did not realize the weapon he was carrying. That drive bypassed standard banking protocols. If I could get my hands on it, I could access emergency capital that even the probate courts knew nothing about. Harrison patted my shoulder and walked out of the room, locking the deadbolt behind him. I sat in the silent, dim bedroom and formulated the next equation. Playing the brain-damaged victim bought me a temporary shield. Now I needed to steal the key right off the warden's belt and begin the forensic audit that would burn his empire to the ground. The small white pill dissolved in the bathroom sink, turning into a chalky paste before swirling down the drain. I washed it away with cold water, gripping the porcelain edges until my knuckles turned white. Harrison thought he could medicate me into compliance. He relied on the assumption that a traumatized woman would seek the comfort of chemical oblivion. He underestimated the clarity that comes from profound betrayal. I waited for the sun to drop below the tree line. The heavy July heat broke, giving way to the humid night air typical of an Alabama summer. Through the wooden blinds, I tracked the movement in the main house. Around 8 o'clock, the headlights of Harrison's pristine SUV cut through the darkness, sweeping across the lawn as he pulled out of the long driveway. He had political dinners to attend, hands to shake, and donors to charm, using a campaign war chest built on my corpse. A single lamp burned in the upstairs master suite, indicating my mother had retired for the evening, likely accompanied by her crystal glass and a fresh bottle of bourbon. The rest of the sprawling estate sat in darkness. I pushed the bathroom window open again, ignoring the sharp protest of my unhealed joints. The drop into the azalea bushes felt familiar this time. I navigated the perimeter, keeping my silhouette pressed against the brick facade. I reached the rear patio. The French doors leading into the formal study featured an archaic security sensor that my father installed in the late 90s. I knew the exact sequence to bypass the magnetic contact, having used it 100 times to sneak back into the house during my college years. I slipped a flat gardening stake from a nearby terracotta pot, sliding it between the doors and popping the internal latch. The door swung open with a soft sigh. I stepped into the study. The room smelled of old paper lemon oil and something sharp and metallic. Brass polish. My eyes adjusted to the ambient moonlight filtering through the sheer curtains. The study served as Vivian's private sanctuary, a room dedicated to preserving her aristocratic lineage. Above the carved mahogany fireplace sat a heavy brass urn. Across the room, my bare feet silent on the thick Persian rug. I stood before the mantel, staring at the polished metal vessel. A soft cotton rag stained with dark streaks of oxidation rested neatly beside it. Vivian cleaned the urn obsessively. I could smell the sharp chemical tang of the polish hovering in the air. My analytical mind processed the terrible equation. The urn contained cremated human remains. If I was standing here, breathing the humid summer air whose ashes resided inside that brass container, a cold shudder cascaded down my spine. The realization carried a dark, terrifying weight. They needed a death certificate to trigger the insurance payout. A death certificate requires a body. They did not just fake paperwork. They purchased a corpse. They found a stranger who died without a name, and they burned her down to ash, claiming her dust as their own. Vivian polished this vessel every single day because the rotting guilt of possessing a stolen stranger required constant physical penance. She scrubbed the brass, trying to scrub away the federal crimes sitting in her home. I turned away from the mantel, sickened by the scent of the metal. I had a specific objective, and I could not let horror disrupt my focus. Harrison maintained his home office directly across the hall. I crept through the silent corridor and eased his office door open. The space reflected his personality perfectly, stark minimalist and brutally organized. A vast glass desk dominated the center of the room, holding a sleek dual-monitor computer setup. Harrison possessed immense arrogance. Arrogant men rarely believe their inner sanctuaries are vulnerable. I tapped the spacebar. The screens glowed to life, casting a pale blue light across the room. A password prompt appeared. I did not need his encrypted USB token to access his local desktop. That token managed offshore accounts. For his home computer, I relied on human predictability. 3 years ago, Harrison won a landmark corporate defense case, setting the foundation for his political aspirations. It was the defining moment of his ego. I typed the date of that verdict into the keyboard. The prompt vanished. The desktop opened. I pulled a generic, unencrypted flash drive from a ceramic pen cup on the edge of the desk, plugging it into the side port. I needed hard evidence. I opened his local mail client and ran a raw text search for the term dental. A hidden archived folder appeared. The directory contained a chain of correspondence dated 5 months ago. The emails were exchanged with a Dr. Gable, an ambitious medical examiner functioning out of a neighboring rural county. I read the text illuminating the screen. The language was coded, but the forensic translation was undeniable. Harrison negotiated a discreet fee disguised as a campaign consulting donation. In exchange, Dr. Gable provided access to a transient woman who perished in a severe trailer fire. The fire rendered the victim unrecognizable. Harrison supplied my dental records lifted from my childhood orthodontist. Dr. Gable swapped the files, legally signing a government document declaring the burned Jane Doe was Abigail Smith. The pieces snapped into place, forming a flawless, horrifying picture. Harrison needed liquid capital to launch his state Senate run. He saw an opportunity, and he engineered my execution. I reviewed the dates of the emails. They aligned perfectly with the week of my accident. The logic hit me with the force of a physical blow. Harrison did not just capitalize on a random hit and run. He orchestrated it. He needed a reason for me to vanish, a tragic narrative to sell to the Mountain Brook Country Club crowd. He ran me off Highway 280, leaving me to die on the asphalt. When I survived, slipping into a deep coma at the rural clinic, he adapted his strategy. He abandoned me as a Jane Doe and bought a burned corpse to finish the paperwork. He was a murderer. My hands began to shake. I am an actuary. I measure risk based on historical data. The data sitting on the screen proved my brother-in-law possessed the capacity for lethal violence. If he caught me in this room, he would not bother with a psychiatric hold. He would snap my neck and bury me in the woods. I dragged the entire archived folder onto the flash drive icon. A progress bar appeared on the screen. The estimated transfer time read 45 seconds. The silence of the house broke. The distinct crunch of heavy tires rolling over the gravel driveway echoed through the open window. Headlights swept across the front lawn, cutting through the darkness and illuminating the office wall. Harrison was back early. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the hum of the computer fan. I stared at the progress bar. 30 seconds. The heavy engine of the SUV cut off. I heard the muffled thud of a car door slamming shut. 20 seconds. Footsteps sounded on the front porch. The metallic jingle of keys echoed through the heavy mahogany front door. 10 seconds. The deadbolt clicked open. The heavy door swung inward. Harrison stepped into the foyer, dropping his leather briefcase onto the hardwood floor. 5 seconds. The bar hit 100%. The window vanished. I yanked the flash drive from the port. I hit the sleep shortcut on the keyboard, plunging the monitors back into total darkness. I grabbed the hem of my shirt and quickly wiped the glass desk, erasing any smudges left by my fingers. Harrison's heavy footsteps moved toward the kitchen. He paused, opening the refrigerator door. I slipped out of the office, keeping my back against the hallway wall. I moved silently through the dining room, navigating by memory until I reached the formal study. I slid through the French doors, pulling them shut right as the kitchen light flipped on, casting a long shadow down the corridor. I ran across the damp lawn, ignoring the tearing thorns of the azaleas as I scrambled back through the guest house window. I collapsed onto the tiled bathroom floor, clutching the plastic flash drive to my chest. I dragged myself into the dark bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress. My lungs burned, fighting for oxygen. I stared at the small device in my palm. It held the digital blueprint of a murder. I had the starting piece of my dossier. But a profound, chilling realization washed over me. Going to the local police with a stolen flash drive would trigger a lengthy investigation. Harrison owned judges. He owned the local media. He would twist the narrative, burying the evidence in endless legal motions while he arranged a quiet, fatal accident for me. I needed to build an inescapable trap. I needed to trace the money, proving every single person in this family benefited from the blood spilled on the highway. Until the entire ledger was mapped out, I had to smile at the man who tried to kill me. During my second year of actuary training, I sat in a sterile corporate boardroom high above the Chicago skyline. The instructor stood beside a dry erase board and taught us how to quantify a human life. It is a cold, unfeeling equation. You calculate the remaining years of expected labor, you factor in potential salary growth, you subtract the statistical probability of chronic disease. You reduce a breathing person to a flat dollar amount on a balance sheet. I mastered that math quickly. I learned to look at a tragedy and see only the settlement cost. Sitting in the dim guest house, I realized my family applied the exact same formula to me. They weighed my utility against my cash value. The math dictated that I was worth more to them buried in a false grave than I was sitting at their holiday dinner table. $2 million. That was the price tag they placed on my existence. Harrison kept an old backup laptop in the bottom drawer of the guest room desk. It was disconnected from the primary network, but it possessed basic software capable of reading the flash drive I stole from his office. I booted up the machine. The screen glowed, illuminating the dark bedroom. I plugged in the drive and opened the extracted financial archives. It was time to follow the blood money. The insurance firm wired the settlement into a primary trust. Harrison acted as the executor. From there, the capital scattered like water poured onto dry dirt. I traced the routing numbers one by one. My mother received exactly $500,000. The pristine facade of the Mountain Brook estate hid a rotting financial foundation. Vivian possessed a secret property tax debt spanning 5 years. The county assessor was quietly preparing a foreclosure notice. My death bought her a clean slate. The funds went directly to the state treasury, saving her social standing and keeping her manicured ivy walls intact. My sister and her husband absorbed the largest portion. Their cut traveled through a labyrinth of corporate accounts. They washed the funds through 3 different consulting vendors. Harrison funneled his half into a political action committee to finance his upcoming state Senate campaign. He purchased television advertisements, campaign staff, and tailored suits using the premium I paid into my policy every month. Beatrice took the remaining balance and transferred it to a commercial real estate holding firm. The ledger showed she used my blood money to secure the lease for a high-end luxury boutique in downtown Birmingham. Then there was my younger brother. Nolan always lived in the shadow of the family expectations. He lacked Harrison's ruthless ambition and Vivian's social grace. Nolan survived on blind luck and a severe betting compulsion. He spent his entire adult life bouncing between failed tech startups and underground poker tables in neighboring counties. The ledger revealed his share equaled $500,000. It was meant to stabilize his erratic lifestyle. The transaction history painted a pathetic picture. Offshore sports betting platforms, luxury car leases, high-interest personal loans paid in full and then immediately redrawn. He burned through his entire cut in less than 6 months. The money was gone, and the debt was climbing again. Dawn crept through the wooden blinds. I shut down the laptop and hid the flash drive inside the lining of my duffel bag. I needed to observe the players in the daylight. I walked across the lawn and entered the main house kitchen. Nolan stood by the marble island. He held a heavy crystal glass. At 10 in the morning, he was already pouring cheap bourbon. The ice cubes hit the sides of the crystal. The sound was a rapid, nervous clinking that echoed in the quiet room. His hands shook uncontrollably. He raised the glass to his lips, spilling amber liquid onto his expensive linen shirt. He noticed me standing in the doorway and froze. Nolan did not possess the sociopathic calm of our brother-in-law. Guilt ate away at his fragile nervous system. He looked at me like I was a genuine ghost. His eyes darted toward the floor, unable to meet my gaze. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chilling air conditioning. "Good morning, Nolan," I said, keeping my voice soft and vacant. He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. "You should not be out of bed, Abigail. Harrison said you need strict cognitive rest." I ignored his instruction and walked to the refrigerator. "I am just getting some cold water. My head feels cloudy today." I poured a glass and turned back to him. "You look tired, Nolan. Are you sleeping poorly?" The question hit him like a physical strike. He gripped the crystal glass tighter. "I am fine, just work stress." He turned his back on me and hurried out of the kitchen, his footsteps heavy and uneven on the hardwood floor. His panic revealed the fatal flaw in their conspiracy. A criminal syndicate is only as strong as its weakest member. Harrison and Vivian operated on cold logic. Nolan operated on raw fear. They were bound by mutually assured destruction. If the authorities discovered the faked death, everyone went to prison. But a terrified man does not think about the group's survival. He thinks about saving himself. I needed to fracture their alliance. I needed to turn the thieves against each other. I returned to the guest house and formulated a wedge. The old laptop connected to a dusty wireless printer sitting on the closet shelf. I opened the financial documents and isolated a specific chain of transfers. Harrison created the shell corporation to wash the campaign funds, but he did not use his own name on the primary incorporation documents. The signature line bore Nolan's forged signature. Harrison designed the corporate structure to shield his political career, ensuring that if the Federal Election Commission ever audited the account, the paper trail pointed directly to his degenerate brother-in-law. I printed 3 distinct pages: the incorporation certificate, the fraudulent wire transfer, the forged signature page. The data told a terrifying story without requiring a single spoken word. It implied Harrison planned to throw Nolan to the wolves if the insurance fraud unraveled. The estate remained quiet during the afternoon. Vivian left for a country club luncheon. Harrison drove to his downtown law office. Nolan retreated to the backyard pool, sleeping off his morning bourbon. I slipped through the empty hallways and entered Nolan's bedroom. The space smelled of stale tobacco and nervous sweat. Discarded clothing littered the carpet. Racing forms and unpaid credit card bills covered the nightstand. I walked over to his unmade bed. I placed the 3 printed ledger pages directly on his pillow, right next to his car keys. I took a bright yellow highlighter from his desk and drew a single, clean line across his forged signature. I left no note. Explanations dilute the impact of cold, hard facts. I retreated to the corridor and pressed myself into the alcove shadow. 10 minutes later, the back door opened. Nolan trudged up the carpeted stairs, his bare feet slapping against the steps. He walked into his bedroom, The door remained ajar. The silence stretched for 30 agonizing seconds. Then I heard a sharp, sudden intake of breath. A heavy thud followed as a piece of furniture was kicked across the room. Nolan unleashed a string of panicked, breathy curses. I heard the frantic rustling of paper as he grabbed the documents. His breathing escalated into a full panic attack. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket and dialed a number. He paced the floor like a caged animal. "Pick up the phone, Harrison," he hissed into the receiver. "Pick it up right now, you manipulative coward. We have a serious problem." I smiled in the dark hallway. The seed of betrayal was planted deep in the fertile soil of his paranoia. The unified front was officially broken. Now I just had to wait for the family to tear itself apart. The afternoon stretched into a suffocating evening. I stayed hidden in the guest house, watching the main property through the slats of the wooden blinds. Nolan did not leave. He paced the length of the back patio, ignoring the sprawling swimming pool and the manicured gardens. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a sheer drop, waiting for a gust of wind. I needed a secure method to capture his inevitable collapse. Harrison swept my pockets when I arrived, ensuring I possessed no electronics. But a vast estate requires a small army of invisible labor. Our housekeeper kept her personal belongings in a small canvas tote near the laundry room. During the afternoon shift change, I slipped into the utility corridor and borrowed her prepaid burner smartphone. It was a cheap plastic device with a cracked screen and a functional voice recorder app. I slid it into the waistband of my sweatpants, feeling the hard plastic against my skin. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the Alabama sky in bruised shades of purple and dark orange. The heavy humidity settled over the grounds, bringing the deafening chirp of cicadas. I walked out the back door of the guest house and crossed the lawn. Nolan sat slouched in a wrought iron patio chair. The patio lights cast long, harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the dark circles under his eyes. He held a single, unlit cigarette. He rolled the white paper back and forth between his trembling index finger and thumb. The tobacco leaves crinkled dryly in the quiet air. He did not possess a lighter. He just needed something to occupy his frantic hands. I stepped onto the stone pavers, making sure my bare feet slapped lightly against the ground. I wanted him to hear my approach. I wanted him to feel the presence of the sister he betrayed. He flinched, dropping the cigarette onto his lap. He stared at me, his chest heaving under his wrinkled linen shirt. "It is hard to sleep," I murmured, letting my voice waver. I wrapped my arms around my torso, shivering despite the sweltering heat. "The house feels too quiet, Nolan." He swallowed hard, staring at the dark surface of the swimming pool. "You should go back inside, Abigail. Harrison will be furious if he catches you wandering the grounds." I pulled out a second iron chair and sat across from him. I leaned forward, letting the dim light catch my blank, vacant expression. I pressed the discreet record button on the stolen phone hidden beneath the hem of my shirt. "My head is full of static," I said softly. "But sometimes things break through. Numbers mostly. And rules. Did you know the brain retains specialized information even after severe trauma? It is like an echo. I keep hearing echoes about my old job." Nolan stopped rolling the cigarette. His hands froze on his lap. "What kind of echoes?" he asked, his voice tight and breathless. "Things about corporate structures," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly innocent. "About liability. For instance, I keep remembering the specific statutes for the Alabama Penal Code. Section 13A, Forgery and Fraudulent Business Practices. Is it not strange the things a damaged mind holds on to?" Nolan turned his head slowly. The ambient light reflected the sheer terror swimming in his eyes. I tilted my head, feigning innocent confusion. "It is just fascinating. I remember reading that federal prosecutors do not care who engineered a financial crime. They only follow the paper trail. They look for the physical signature on the incorporation documents. Whoever signs the shell company paperwork absorbs the entire mandatory minimum sentence, 10 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. The puppet master always walks free, while the signatory takes the fall." A sharp, choked sound escaped Nolan's throat. The paper hints I left on his pillow had already primed his paranoia. Hearing the exact legal consequences from the mouth of his resurrected sister severed the last remaining thread of his sanity. "Harrison is setting me up," he whispered. The words tumbled out of his mouth in a frantic, desperate rush. "He made me sign those papers, Abigail. He told me it was just a standard liability shield for the campaign. He promised I was protected." I maintained my empty, confused gaze. Protected from what, Nolan? Why would Harrison need a liability shield? Nolan leaned forward, burying his face in his shaking hands. The unlit cigarette fell to the stone patio, forgotten. He began to sob. It was a pathetic, hollow sound, the sound of a weak man crumbling under the weight of his own actions. "I did not mean to do it," he cried, his voice muffled by his palms. "I swear to God, Abigail, I never meant to hurt you." The air in my lungs turned to ice. The forensic timeline in my head halted. I sat perfectly still, waiting for the variable to define itself. "Hurt me?" I asked, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. Nolan dropped his hands. Tears tracked through the sweat on his face. The night of the accident, he stammered. "I was at the casino across the county line. I lost $80,000 at the tables. I drank too much. I knew Vivian would cut me off if she found out. I drove back on Highway 280. It was pouring rain. The visibility was terrible." He choked on a sob, gasping for air. "You were jogging on the shoulder," he continued. I did not see the reflective vest until it was too late. The car hydroplaned. I felt the impact. I hit the brakes and ran out into the storm. You were lying in the ditch. There was so much blood, Abigail. You were not moving. I panicked. I thought I killed my own sister. My heart stopped beating. The red herring dissolved instantly. Harrison did not orchestrate the hit and run to steal my insurance policy. My own flesh and blood ran me down in a drunken stupor. What happened next, I demanded. The feigned confusion vanished from my voice, replaced by a cold, exacting edge. I called Harrison. Nolan whimpered. He was the only one who could fix it. He drove out to the highway. He checked your pulse and realized you were still breathing. I wanted to call an ambulance, but he took my phone. He said if the police arrived, I would go to prison for vehicular manslaughter and the family name would be ruined. He said he had a better plan, a plan that would solve all our financial problems. Nolan wiped his nose on his sleeve, unable to look at me. He put you in the trunk of his car. He drove you to that unregulated rural clinic out in the county. He paid the intake nurse in cash to log you as a Jane Doe. Then he took my damaged car to a private salvage yard. He told Vivian and Beatrice you went missing. A month later, he bought the burned body from the medical examiner and ordered the cremation. He filed the insurance claim. He used the money to pay my gambling debts to keep me quiet. The plot twist reshaped the entire landscape of my betrayal. The crime was not a calculated assassination. It was a cowardly, drunken mistake covered up by a family prioritizing their social status and their bank accounts over my life. They literally threw my broken, bleeding body into a trunk like discarded luggage to protect a degenerate gambler and fund a political campaign. You left me to die in a cinder block room, I stated. It was not a question. It was a final judgment. Nolan slid out of the iron chair and fell to his knees on the hard stone patio. He reached out, grasping the fabric of my sweatpants. "Please, Abigail," he begged. "You have to understand. Harrison controlled everything." I was terrified. "I am so sorry. Please forgive me." I looked down at the weeping man gripping my knees. A profound internal shift occurred deep within my chest. The residual warmth of familial attachment evaporated, leaving behind a vast Arctic emptiness. My analytical mind discarded the concept of forgiveness. Forgiveness is an emotional luxury. I operate on balanced ledgers. Nolan incurred a debt the moment his bumper shattered my ribs. Harrison compounded the interest the moment he locked me in the trunk. Beatrice and Vivian financed their lavish lifestyles using the principal. The entire family was complicit in my execution. I reached into my waistband and pressed the square icon on the cracked phone screen. The red recording dot disappeared, saving the flawless audio file to the internal storage. I possessed the confession. I held the exact narrative of the conspiracy from the mouth of a direct participant. I gently pried his trembling fingers off my clothing. I stood up, towering over him as he kneeled on the stone. "Get up, Nolan," I said, my voice devoid of any human warmth. The performance was over. The confused victim was dead. Only the actuary remained. He stared up at me, his tear-streaked face twisting in fresh confusion. "Abigail," he whispered. "Wipe your face and go to sleep," I commanded. The tone triggered his ingrained submission to authority. I turned away from him and walked back toward the dark guest house. The stakes had skyrocketed. I was no longer an investigator searching for the architect of my misfortune. I was the architect of their ruin. The men in this family proved their capacity for lethal cowardice. Now it was time to test the women. Tomorrow, I would leave the estate and visit my sister. I needed to see exactly how much blood money Beatrice was willing to wear before her neck snapped under the weight. The morning sun baked the asphalt of downtown Birmingham. I navigated the bustling sidewalks wearing a pair of oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat I salvaged from the estate mudroom. I needed to move freely without triggering recognition from the local socialites. My destination sat on a prime corner of the shopping district. The storefront featured soaring glass windows displaying handcrafted Italian handbags. Sleek gold lettering spelled out the name of the establishment across the awning: Beatrice Boutique. My sister always possessed a flair for profound vanity. I pushed through the heavy door. A small brass bell chimed, signaling my arrival. Immediately, the rich, nauseating scent of bespoke leather and expensive conditioning oil assaulted my senses. The aroma was suffocating. To anyone else, it smelled like prosperity and high fashion. To me, it smelled like coagulated blood on a dark, rainy highway. This entire inventory existed because my body shattered against a bumper. Soft instrumental jazz floated from hidden ceiling speakers. Polished marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting. I walked past a display of imported silk scarves. Beatrice stood near the mahogany checkout counter. She wore a tailored crimson blazer and crisp white trousers, projecting the image of a fearless, self-made entrepreneur. She was busy instructing a young sales associate about visual merchandising. Beatrice spent her entire adult life searching for a legacy. While I studied statistical mathematics and secured corporate contracts, she chased social validation. She married a charismatic lawyer, assuming his success would elevate her own standing. But being a politician's wife never satisfied her ego. She wanted an empire. Harrison finally gave her one, using my corpse as the collateral. The sales associate nodded and disappeared into the stockroom. Beatrice turned toward the front of the store. Her gaze swept over my cheap charity bin clothing before landing on my face. She froze. The clipboard in her hand slipped clattering loudly against the marble tile. Harrison had concealed my resurrection. He locked me in the guest house and left his wife operating under the delusion that I remained safely reduced to ashes in a brass urn. He protected his political ambitions by isolating the variables. "Abigail," she gasped. Her voice was a fragile, terrified whisper. The color drained from her perfectly contoured cheeks. "Hello, Beatrice," I replied, keeping my tone pleasant and entirely calm. "The store looks beautiful. You really captured that upscale aesthetic." She stumbled backward, bumping into the checkout counter. Her chest heaved. "You are dead. We buried you." Harrison delivered the eulogy. I stepped closer, removing the oversized sunglasses. The reports of my demise were highly exaggerated. I experienced a lengthy medical delay. It is a long story, but I am recovering quite nicely now. Beatrice gripped the edge of the mahogany counter. Her knuckles turned white. She stared at me as if an apparition had materialized to haunt her pristine shop. "Harrison said the doctors found you in the wreckage," she stammered. "He said the fire destroyed everything. He identified your dental records. He identified a stranger, Beatrice. He bought a burned victim and claimed the insurance payout." Her eyes darted wildly around the empty boutique. What insurance payout, she demanded. "Harrison told me the startup capital for this business came from a secret trust our father established before he died. He said the lawyers finally unlocked the accounts after your tragic passing. The revelation confirmed my hypothesis. Harrison and Vivian insulated Beatrice from the gruesome mechanics of the conspiracy. They knew her fragile nerves would shatter if she possessed the actual details. They fed her a comforting lie about a hidden inheritance, allowing her to play the role of the triumphant businesswoman without the burden of guilt. A sleek digital point-of-sale tablet rested on the counter between us. The screen displayed the daily sales metrics and inventory logs. I reached out and tapped the application icon. "What are you doing?" Beatrice hissed, swatting at my hand. "Do not touch that. You cannot be here." "I need to call my husband." I blocked her arm with a swift, decisive motion. My grip locked onto her wrist. I may have spent half a year in a hospital bed, but I possessed a cold, mechanical strength born from absolute fury. "Do not call anyone yet," I instructed softly. "You pride yourself on being a chief executive. You should understand your own balance sheets." I released her arm and pulled the tablet closer. During my night in the guest house, I memorized the exact routing numbers and transaction timestamps from Harrison's hidden ledger. I opened the boutique financial software and navigated to the initial funding deposits. My fingers danced across the digital glass. I input the specific date of the federal wire transfer. The screen refreshed, displaying a massive injection of liquid capital. "Look at the origin routing data," I commanded, stepping aside so she could view the monitor. Beatrice hesitated before leaning forward. Her eyes scanned the glowing digits. I watched the cognitive dissonance wage war behind her expression. "That is the holding company Harrison set up," she murmured. "The trust fund distributor." I tapped the screen, bringing up the public registry database. I typed in the holding company identification number. The search results populated instantly. The entity did not originate from our late father. The registered funding source listed a prominent national life insurance provider. Beside it sat the specific policy number I purchased 5 years ago. "Your husband lied to you," I stated, my voice dropping into a clinical, exacting register. "There was no secret trust. Our father died bankrupt. That initial deposit equals exactly 1/3 of my death benefit. You did not build an empire, Beatrice. You opened a storefront using the premium paid for my severed life." The horrifying truth fractured her pristine reality. The delusion of the self-made entrepreneur crumbled, leaving behind a terrified woman standing in a shop financed by a federal felony. She looked at the expensive leather handbags surrounding us. The boutique suddenly transformed from a sanctuary of luxury into a physical monument to her complicity. "This cannot be real," she whispered, shaking her head frantically. "Harrison would not do this. He is running for the state senate. He upholds the law." "He upholds his own interests," I corrected. "He hid my survival because returning the money destroys his campaign. He let you sign the commercial lease because it launders the stolen funds through a legitimate business front. If the authorities audit this enterprise, your signature rests on every single fraudulent tax document. He insulated himself and exposed you." Beatrice backed away from the counter, her breathing shallow and rapid. She grabbed a sleek smartphone from her blazer pocket. "Get out," she ordered, her voice escalating into a shrill panic. "Leave my store right now. You are insane. The accident broke your mind. I am calling the Birmingham police. I will have you removed for trespassing." I did not flinch. I did not move toward the exit. I simply stood my ground and stared into her terrified eyes. "Go ahead and dial the authorities, Beatrice," I offered, gesturing toward her phone. "Tell the dispatcher there is an intruder in your shop. When the officers arrive, they will demand my identification. They will run my fingerprints through the system." Her thumb hovered over the glowing screen, trembling violently. "Do you know what the system will tell them?" I asked, stepping forward until only a few inches separated us. "The system will tell them I am legally deceased. The officers will pull the probate records. They will see the $2 million payout. They will look at the woman standing in front of them, and then they will look at the owner of the boutique, funded by that exact payout." I lowered my voice to a razor-sharp whisper. "Dead women cannot be arrested for trespassing, Beatrice. But Business owners can certainly be indicted for receiving stolen federal funds. The phone slipped from her grasp, landing softly on a cashmere display sweater. The psychological noose tightened around her throat. She recognized the trap. Calling the police to remove me would instantly detonate the conspiracy, destroying her marriage, her reputation, and her freedom. She was entirely paralyzed. "What do you want from me?" she choked out, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. "I want you to enjoy your success," I replied, my tone completely devoid of empathy. "I want you to look around this beautiful shop every single day and remember exactly what it cost. I want you to smell the leather and know you are breathing in the decay of your own family." I turned away from the counter and walked toward the glass exit. I did not look back. I stepped out into the sweltering Alabama heat, leaving my sister trapped in a pristine, luxurious cage of her own making. The walk back to the Mountain Brook estate drained the last reserves of energy from my unhealed muscles. The sweltering afternoon sun baked the pavement, sending waves of distorted heat rising from the asphalt. I kept my head down, slipping through the wrought iron side gate and navigating the shadowed perimeter of the manicured lawn. I expected to find the guest house empty. Instead, a sleek black Lexus sedan sat parked near the detached garage. The license plate bore a customized medical insignia. Harrison and Vivian realized my coherence posed a fatal threat. They needed to neutralize my credibility before I could map the rest of their financial labyrinth. They decided to execute the strategy I overheard them plotting the day before. I turned the brass knob and pushed the guest house door open. The small living room felt like a staged theater set. Harrison stood near the curtained window, his posture rigid and commanding. He wore a dark navy suit, projecting the authority of a seasoned litigator. Vivian sat on the edge of the floral sofa, gripping a white silk handkerchief in her lap. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, but a thin sheen of nervous sweat coated her forehead. In the center of the room sat a man I did not recognize. He occupied the heavy leather armchair. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and a tailored gray tweed jacket, despite the crushing summer heat. A thick, leather-bound notepad rested on his crossed knee. He held a gold fountain pen, resting the nib against the pristine white paper. "Welcome back," Abigail Harrison said. His tone dripped with practiced synthetic sympathy. We were beginning to worry. "This is Dr. Elias Sterling. He is a private specialist. We asked him to stop by and evaluate your recovery." I stepped into the room, allowing the heavy door to click shut behind me. I did not run. I did not shout. I walked over to the modest wooden dining chair and sat down, folding my hands in my lap. Dr. Sterling adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. The narrative briefly steps into the mind of the veteran physician. Elias Sterling made a very lucrative living catering to the elite families of Birmingham. He specialized in discreet interventions handling the messy, inconvenient relatives of wealthy zip codes. He operated comfortably on the fringe of medical ethics, signing involuntary commitment orders when a difficult heir needed to vanish into a private facility. Sterling evaluated the woman sitting across from him. He expected a fractured psyche. Harrison briefed him earlier, describing a tragic, transient woman suffering from severe post-traumatic amnesia, claiming the identity of a deceased socialite. Sterling anticipated tears, erratic hand gestures, and a desperate plea for validation. He planned to document the hysteria, diagnosing profound delusions to justify a secure psychiatric hold. He uncaps his fountain pen. The sharp, metallic scratch of the gold nib against the thick paper sounded loud in the tense, silent room. He writes down the date and a single clinical observation regarding her cheap charity bin clothing. "Hello, Jane." Dr. Sterling began employing a soothing, patronizing cadence. "Your family tells me you are experiencing some profound confusion regarding your identity and your past." I stared directly at the center of his forehead. I did not blink. The human brain perceives a prolonged, unblinking stare as a predatory threat. I let the silence stretch for 10 agonizing seconds. The scratching of his fountain pen slowed and then ceased entirely. "My name is Abigail Smith," I stated. My voice emerged flat, devoid of any emotional inflection. I am a senior actuary. I measure risk. I evaluate corporate ledgers, and I calculate the cost of human error. Right now, Dr. Sterling, you are standing on the edge of a very expensive error. Sterling offered a practiced, indulgent smile. He looked toward Harrison, sharing a brief, knowing glance. It is common for the mind to construct a protective narrative after a severe physical trauma, Jane. Tell me why you believe you belong in this house. I ignored his diagnostic bait. You maintain a private practice in the prestigious downtown medical district, I countered. But your patient roster declined sharply 3 years ago. You lost your primary hospital privileges following a rather complicated legal dispute involving a patient named Catherine Caldwell. The indulgent smile vanished from the doctor's face. His posture stiffened. The gold pen hovered motionless above his notepad. Harrison shifted his weight near the window, his jaw tightening. You signed an involuntary psychiatric hold for Catherine Caldwell. I continued reciting the raw data I extracted from the hidden flash drive. You declared her legally incompetent. Her husband subsequently liquidated her entire stock portfolio and transferred the assets into an offshore account. When the medical board launched an inquiry, you faced the permanent revocation of your license. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Harrison represented you. He brokered a sealed settlement to bury the malpractice suit, saving your career. In exchange, you owe him permanent favors. You function as his personal cleaner whenever a relative becomes a liability. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the guest house. Sterling stared at me, his medical assessment shattering into a dozen jagged pieces. A delusional, transient woman does not possess encyclopedic knowledge of sealed legal settlements. She does not dissect a physician's disgraced history with cold, clinical precision. You are stepping into a trap, Elias, I said, dropping his formal title to strip away his authority. My brother-in-law is not asking you to commit a confused imposter. He is asking you to help him silence a living, breathing victim of a federal crime. I turned my gaze toward Harrison. 6 months ago, my family engineered my death. They secured a forged death certificate. They purchased a burned corpse from a corrupt medical examiner in the next county. They cremated a stranger and claimed a $2 million life insurance payout. Vivian let out a sharp, trembling gasp, pressing the silk handkerchief to her mouth. I focused my attention back on the paralyzed psychiatrist. The math is very simple, Elias. If you sign that psychiatric evaluation, you are no longer a doctor performing a favor for a colleague. You become an active, participating accessory to wire fraud, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. The federal authorities do not offer sealed settlements for those offenses. They offer mandatory minimum sentences in a federal penitentiary. Sterling was a creature of absolute self-preservation. He survived the medical board inquiry by protecting his own interests. He looked at Vivian, noting her pale, trembling hands and the raw terror leaking from her eyes. He looked at Harrison, observing the rigid, defensive posture of a man cornered by his own hubris. The risk matrix flipped instantly. The reward of pleasing a political ally did not outweigh the threat of a federal indictment. Sterling closed his leather-bound notepad. He screwed the gold cap onto his fountain pen, slipping it into his tweed jacket pocket. He stood up, lifting his heavy leather briefcase from the floor. "We are done here," he announced, his voice tight and clipped. Harrison stepped away from the window, holding up a hand. "Elias, wait. She is manipulating you. This is exactly the kind of pathological delusion we discussed. You owe me this evaluation." "I owe you legal fees," Sterling countered, walking toward the heavy guest house door. "I do not owe you a prison sentence. Do not call my office again, Harrison." The brass doorknob turned. The heavy wood swung open, letting in a rush of humid summer air. The doctor marched out into the fading daylight. Seconds later, the powerful engine of the Lexus roared to life. Tires crunched aggressively over the gravel driveway as the vehicle sped toward the iron gates, abandoning the conspiracy. The counterattack failed. The room felt smaller, now stripped of its medical authority. Vivian broke. The pristine Southern matriarch facade she cultivated for decades cracked and fell away, revealing the ugly, frantic cowardice underneath. She dropped her silk handkerchief, her hands curled into tight, shaking fists. "You ungrateful, wretched girl," she hissed. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of its usual honeyed charm. "We gave you a beautiful life. We paid for your education. We tolerated your cold, unfeeling personality. And you come back here trying to destroy your own blood." She took a step toward me, her eyes wide and wild. "You should have died on that highway." The words hung in the air, a vicious final verdict. A mother wishing for the successful execution of her own child. I remained perfectly still, absorbing the statement without a single flinch. The confirmation of her hatred felt liberating. It severed the final invisible thread of familial obligation. Harrison moved quickly, intercepting his mother-in-law before she could cross the room. He grabbed Vivian by the shoulders, steering her toward the open doorway. "Not now, Vivian," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "We need to regroup. We need to secure the perimeter." He pushed her out into the humid evening. Harrison paused in the threshold, turning back to look at me. The polished lawyer was gone. The man staring at me possessed the cold, desperate eyes of a cornered predator. He realized the legal channels were closed. Psychiatric holds and bureaucratic maneuvers would not contain me. The balance of power shifted permanently. They could not control the ghost they created. As Harrison pulled the heavy door shut, I knew the intellectual chess match was ending. The next phase of the conflict would not involve doctors or bank tellers. The stakes demanded raw, desperate survival. They would have to eliminate the threat using their own hands. The humid Alabama morning broke with a heavy, oppressive stillness. I sat on the edge of the guest house mattress watching condensation trace slow paths down the window pane. The confrontation with Dr. Sterling left a residue of frantic paranoia hovering over the estate. Harrison and Vivian were trapped. Their legal avenues were exhausted. But before they could formulate a physical solution, a new variable drove through the wrought iron gates. It was not a luxury SUV or a sleek imported sedan. A sensible, silver, mid-size rental car rolled up the gravel driveway. The vehicle parked with pragmatic precision. The driver's side door opened, revealing a man who looked entirely out of place among the Mountain Brook elite. He wore a rumpled tan suit and carried a thick, scuffed leather briefcase. He did not possess the polished swagger of a politician or the refined arrogance of a legacy heir. He carried the weary, relentless posture of a corporate auditor. I recognized the breed immediately. I spent my entire career working alongside men just like him. They do not care about social status or country club memberships. They care about discrepancies in the spreadsheet. I slipped out the back door of the guest house and moved through the dense azalea bushes. The dew soaked through my sweatpants, but I ignored the discomfort. I pressed my back against the brick facade, inching toward the open dining room window. The heavy summer air carried their voices perfectly. The sound of a heavy leather briefcase dropping onto Vivian's pristine mahogany dining table echoed through the open window. The thud was a dense, authoritative strike against the fragile, aristocratic silence. "Good morning, Mr. Croft," the man said. His tone was polite, but entirely devoid of warmth. "My name is Marcus Vance. I am a senior claims investigator for the primary underwriter of Abigail Smith's life insurance policy." The name dropped into the room like a live grenade. Harrison cleared his throat, a hollow sound masking sudden panic. "Mr. Vance, we were not expecting anyone from the firm. The payout settled months ago. The estate is closed. My mother-in-law is still grieving. This unannounced visit feels highly inappropriate." Harrison shifted into his default strategy. He attempted to smother the threat with Southern charm and subtle intimidation. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Croft," Marcus replied, the brass latches of his briefcase snapping open. However, the corporate fraud division flagged the payout during our routine quarterly review. We discovered several distinct anomalies regarding the timeline. "What anomalies?" Harrison demanded, his voice tightening. "I handled the probate filing myself, everything processed according to state regulations." Marcus shuffled a stack of papers. The rustling paper sounded like a tightening snare. Your firm expedited the death certificate in record time, he stated. The remains were processed by a rural medical examiner located 3 counties away from the accident site. The body underwent immediate cremation before an independent autopsy could verify the findings. Statistically speaking, a $2 million claim involving an unidentified hit-and-run victim requires a minimum 9-month review. Yours cleared in under 20 weeks. I listened to the exchange, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. Marcus represented a profound external threat. My initial calculation assumed I only needed to dismantle my family. But the insurance firm was already hunting. If Marcus discovered I was alive before I exposed the fraud on my own terms, the corporate lawyers would draw the most logical conclusion. They would assume I orchestrated the fake death to steal the premium, and that my family merely acted as accomplices. I would not just lose my identity, I would face a federal indictment for staging my own murder. Harrison recognized the danger, but chose to double down on his arrogance. He crossed his arms, his leather shoes shifting on the hardwood floor. "Are you accusing my family of impropriety, Mr. Vance? I am launching a state senate campaign next month. I play golf with the regional director of your underwriting department. I suggest you tread very carefully before you cast aspersions on a grieving household." Marcus did not flinch. The political name-dropping bounced off his bureaucratic armor. "You can play golf with the board of directors, Mr. Croft. It does not change the math. I need full access to the trust routing numbers and the original dental records. If you refuse to comply, I will petition a federal judge to freeze all connected assets pending a criminal inquiry." The threat hung in the humid air. Harrison was trapped. Denying access guaranteed a federal freeze. Granting access handed the auditor the exact rope needed to hang him. I retreated from the window, sliding back through the azaleas and returning to the dim guest house. My heart pounded a steady, methodical rhythm. I needed to control the corporate narrative. I had to feed the investigator the exact data he needed while remaining a ghost. I pulled the old backup laptop from the desk drawer and booted the machine. I plugged in the stolen flash drive containing the financial ledgers and the medical examiner emails. I could not send the files from a standard connection. I opened a secure encrypted browser, routing the signal through 3 remote servers to mask the origin IP address. I created a sterile, untraceable email account. The digital persona required a distinct voice, not a sister seeking revenge, but a concerned, anonymous whistleblower operating from within Harrison's political orbit. Actuaries understand the power of redacted information. If you provide the entire puzzle, the investigator stops working. If you provide missing pieces, the investigator becomes obsessed with finishing the picture. I selected the primary ledger detailing the shell company and corporation. I applied a digital redaction tool blacking out Nolan's forged signature and Beatrice's boutique deposits. I left Harrison's campaign fund transfers and Vivian's property tax payoffs entirely visible. I wanted the corporate heat laser-focused on the 2 architects of my demise. I attached the files to a brief clinical message. "Mr. Vance, you are looking in the right place but asking the wrong questions. The hit and run was a cover. Look at the campaign finance accounts. Look at the county tax assessor records for the primary estate. The enclosed documents will guide your audit. The architect of the fraud is currently lying to your face." I hit send. The data vanished into the encrypted ether, destined for the corporate server Marcus checked every hour. But digital breadcrumbs are easy to dismiss as political sabotage. I needed to anchor the evidence in the physical world. I needed Marcus to know the whistleblower was watching him right now. I unhooked the dusty wireless printer from the closet shelf and fed a single sheet of blank paper into the tray. I typed out the specific offshore routing number Harrison used to wash the initial insurance deposit, 9 digits printed in stark black ink. I folded the paper, slipping it into a plain white envelope. The stealth operation required precise timing. I watched the main house from the guest window, waiting for the front door to open. 10 minutes later, Marcus emerged. He carried his scuffed briefcase, his posture stiff and unresolved. Harrison stood on the threshold, watching him with a venomous, silent glare. Marcus turned his back and walked down the driveway toward his silver rental car. Harrison stepped back inside the house, slamming the heavy door. This was my window. I slipped out the side door of the guest house, sprinting across the damp grass. My bare feet made no sound. I kept the detached garage between myself and the main house windows, masking my approach. Marcus stood by the driver's side door, unlocking the vehicle with a distinct electronic beep. I rounded the rear bumper of the silver sedan, crouching low to the gravel. I held my breath, clutching the white envelope. The auditor opened the door, tossing his briefcase onto the passenger seat. He leaned in to start the ignition. I reached up, sliding the envelope under the black rubber blade of the windshield wiper. I pulled back instantly, retreating into the shadow of the garage, just as the sedan engine hummed to life. Through the glass, I watched Marcus settle into the driver's seat. His eyes scanned the windshield. He noticed the stark white square pinned beneath the wiper blade. He turned the engine off. He stepped out of the vehicle and plucked the envelope from the glass. I observed his reaction from the shadows. He tore the seal open and unfolded the single sheet of paper. He stared at the 9 printed digits. The weary posture vanished, replaced by the sharp, focused energy of a hound catching a fresh scent. He looked around the quiet, manicured estate, his eyes searching the tree line and the empty lawns. He realized the anonymous informant was close. He folded the paper, placed it in his breast pocket, and drove away. I leaned against the cool brick of the garage, allowing a slow, calculated smile to touch my lips. Dramatic irony is a beautiful weapon. Harrison sat inside his sprawling mansion, pacing the hardwood floors, sweating through his tailored suit. He believed he was fighting a faceless corporate entity in a high-stakes game of political chess. He thought his primary opponent was a bureaucrat in a tan jacket. He was entirely unaware that the ghost sitting in his guest house was the one holding the rope, dictating every single move. But cornered predators become erratic. The auditor's arrival proved the legal shield was cracking. Harrison would recognize that his timeline was shrinking. He could not afford a lengthy medical observation period for his problematic sister-in-law. The financial threat would force his hand, pushing him to eliminate the physical evidence of his crime once and for all. I retreated from the detached garage, keeping my bare feet silent against the damp grass. The humid Alabama air clung to my skin, leaving a sticky residue. I intended to return to the guest house and monitor the digital fallout from my email, but a tall shadow blocked the stone pathway. Harrison stood on the back patio. He had watched the corporate auditor drive away, and the lingering panic in his posture had mutated into a cold, lethal resolve. "We need to talk, Abigail," he instructed. His voice lacked its usual polished cadence. It sounded raw and frayed at the edges. "In the library, right now." I did not argue. I followed him through the French doors and down the long, carpeted corridor. The library served as my late father's sanctuary. It was a cavernous room, paneled in dark mahogany and lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Harrison retained the decor when he moved in, but he never read the leather-bound volumes. He kept them purely for the aesthetic prestige they projected to his visiting political donors. The space smelled of aged paper, stale cigar smoke, and expensive scotch. Harrison walked past the heavy wooden desk and turned to face me. I stood near the threshold. He reached out and pushed the heavy oak door shut. The brass deadbolt turned with a sharp, metallic click. That single sound redefined the boundaries of our engagement. The click of the lock stripped away the civilized facade of the wealthy Mountain Brook estate. It isolated us in a soundproof box. We were no longer a recovering patient and a concerned relative. We were 2 predators, locked in a cage, and only one of us possessed a survival strategy. Harrison loosened his silk tie, pulling the expensive fabric away from his throat. His breathing emerged shallow and rapid. Growing up in a destitute panhandle trailer park, he spent his entire adult life clawing his way up the legal food chain. He married into the Smith family to secure a legacy he could never earn on his own merit. He built a fortress of wealth and influence, using my blood as the mortar. He viewed human beings as either stepping stones or obstacles. I currently represented a fatal obstacle. He unzipped a dark canvas duffel bag resting on the leather armchair. He reached inside and pulled out several thick, banded stacks of currency. He tossed them onto the polished surface of the desk. The bundles hit the wood with a dense, heavy thud. $100,000, Harrison stated. The Southern gentleman persona evaporated entirely. Untraceable cash. It is more than enough to get you across the southern border. You can establish a quiet, comfortable life in a coastal Mexican town. I stared at the Federal Reserve notes. The crisp green paper carried the faint metallic scent of fresh ink. It was a pathetic, desperate bribe. He was offering me a fraction of my own stolen life insurance policy to facilitate my permanent exile. And if I decline your generous travel arrangement, I asked, keeping my spine straight and my hands loosely folded in front of me. He stepped closer. The physical threat radiated from his rigid shoulders. You sustained severe traumatic brain injuries, Abigail. You spent half a year in a deep coma. Medical recovery is a fragile, unpredictable process. Patients suffer fatal relapses all the time. An aneurysm bursts. A sudden cardiac event occurs in the middle of the night. It is a tragic but common biological reality. He offered a stark binary choice. Take the canvas bag and disappear into the desert, or go to sleep tonight and suffer a pillow pressed firmly over my face until my struggling ceased. I looked at the man who threw my broken, bleeding body into the trunk of a damaged sedan. I evaluated his stance, noting the slight tremor in his fingers and the erratic pulse jumping at the base of his throat. He reacted to the immediate crisis, blind to the structural trap already closing around his ankles. He relied on brute force intimidation because his intellectual leverage was gone. You are an exceptional defense attorney, Harrison, I said, my voice dropping into a cool, clinical register. You understand the mechanics of leverage, but you lack a fundamental understanding of advanced risk management. Actuaries do not operate on blind hope. We operate on mathematical fail-safes. He narrowed his eyes, his jaw muscles bunching. What are you talking about? I stepped toward the center of the room, closing the physical distance between us. I wanted him to see my eyes, to recognize the total void of panic in my expression. When I realized you engineered my death, I knew physical confrontation remained a statistical probability. You are a cornered animal facing the destruction of your political career. Cornered animals commit violence. So I removed the incentive for my murder. I gestured toward the locked oak door. If I suffer a tragic medical relapse tonight, you do not solve your problem. You guarantee your own immediate incarceration. Harrison scoffed, producing a short, bitter sound. You are bluffing. You have been locked on this estate wearing charity bin clothing with zero access to the outside world. I possess a photographic memory for digital infrastructure, I corrected him, and your home office network is embarrassingly unsecure. I established a dead man switch using a remote encrypted server farm located in Iceland. The protocol requires a unique cryptographic password entered every 12 hours. I watched the arrogant smirk falter on his lips. If I fail to enter that specific sequence, I continued, the server automatically executes a wide-scale data dump. It sends a compressed folder directly to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It copies the Alabama State Bar Disciplinary Committee. It blind copies the managing editors of the 3 largest news publications in Birmingham. There is no data, he hissed, taking a threatening step forward. His fists clenched at his sides. You have nothing but paranoid theories and ghost stories. I have the archived emails between you and Dr. Gable, I countered, delivering the first fatal strike. I have the negotiated price for the burned transient corpse you purchased to fill my mother's brass urn. I have the altered dental records you submitted to the county coroner. Harrison froze. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. I also have the audio file I added, twisting the blade deeper into his ego. Nolan is a very fragile individual. A few casual remarks regarding federal wire fraud and the mandatory minimum sentences associated with forged corporate signatures broke his mind completely. He confessed to everything on a digital recording. He detailed his drunken hit and run. He detailed how you locked me in your trunk. He detailed how you paid off his casino debts to secure his silence. The silence in the library became suffocating. The ambient hum of the central air conditioning seemed to vanish entirely. Harrison stood, paralyzed, a crumbling monument to ruined ambition. His chest stopped moving. He forgot how to breathe. The realization crashed over him in a relentless tidal wave of inescapable ruin. He could not kill me. He could not force me to flee. My continued breathing was the only mechanism keeping him out of a federal penitentiary. I was his hostage, but he was now my prisoner. I walked past his rigid form, moving gracefully toward the heavy mahogany desk. His leather keyring rested near the corner, right next to an unlit cigar. The sleek, black, encrypted USB token dangled from the metal hoop. It was my token, the digital key to my offshore capital, holding the proprietary algorithms I needed to fund the final phase of this war. He kept it as a trophy, a symbol of his victory over my intellect. I reached out and unclipped the drive from his keyring. The metal clasp snapped with a sharp, decisive sound cutting through the heavy silence. Harrison watched me, his eyes wide and vacant. He was entirely impotent, stripped of his legal authority, his stolen wealth, and his physical dominance in a matter of seconds. He was reduced to a spectator in his own home. "I will be taking this back," I said coldly, holding the black token up to the dim light. "It does not belong to you. In fact, nothing in this house belongs to you anymore." I turned my back on him. I did not rush my departure. I walked to the heavy oak door with the measured, deliberate pace of an executioner leaving the gallows. I reached for the brass deadbolt and turned it. The mechanism slid open with a smooth, heavy clack, undoing his physical threat. I pulled the door open and stepped out into the bright hallway, leaving Harrison Croft locked in a prison constructed entirely from his own hubris. The narrative shifted irrevocably. The ghost was no longer hiding in the shadows of the guest house. I held my digital key, I secured my leverage, and I was ready to bring the entire aristocratic facade crashing to the ground. The heavy oak door of the library clicked shut, isolating my brother-in-law with his ruined ambitions. I did not sneak back to the guest house or hide in the azalea bushes. I walked straight down the center of the manicured lawn, moving toward the wrought iron gates. The humid evening air felt different in my lungs. It no longer carried the suffocating weight of captivity. It carried the crisp electric charge of reclaimed autonomy. The black encrypted USB token rested in my palm, its hard plastic casing dug into my skin, a physical reminder that I possessed the key to my own resurrection. I hailed a passing taxi at the edge of the affluent neighborhood. The driver glanced at my cheap charity bin sweatpants in the rearview mirror, but said nothing when I handed him a crisp $100 bill pulled from my shoe. My first objective was securing digital leverage. I directed him to a late-night electronics retailer in the commercial district. I purchased a mid-tier laptop, navigating the transaction with the quiet efficiency of a woman who no longer feared the shadows. Sitting in a quiet booth at a neon-lit diner across the street, I opened the fresh hardware. I connected to the secure wireless network and plugged the black token into the side port. The proprietary algorithms I coded years ago bypassed the standard banking protocols with flawless precision. Within 12 minutes, I unlocked my emergency offshore reserves. I transferred $50,000 into a secure, untraceable digital wallet. My next step required shedding the physical uniform of a victim. I found an upscale boutique that remained open late. I discarded the baggy gray sweatpants in a public restroom trash can. I purchased a tailored charcoal blazer, crisp white trousers, and sensible leather shoes. I washed my face in the mirror, tying my damp hair back into a severe knot. The broken, terrified ghost vanished. The senior actuary stared back at me, ready to execute a hostile takeover. The strategy required precise legal warfare. If I simply walked into a local police precinct and announced my miraculous survival, the ensuing chaos would heavily favor my family. Alabama probate courts operate on a currency of whispered favors and country club handshakes. Harrison played golf with the county judges. He funded the campaigns of the district attorneys. If I filed a standard civil suit to reclaim my stolen identity, he would tie the case up in endless procedural motions. He would argue profound mental incompetence, citing my prolonged coma. He would stall for years while he systematically drained the remaining funds and destroyed the physical evidence. I needed a mechanism that bypassed the state level entirely. I required a federal hammer. My profession trained me in the nuances of corporate liability. I formulated a plan utilizing the False Claims Act. The statute allows a private citizen to file a lawsuit on behalf of the federal government against individuals committing severe systemic fraud. It is known as a qui tam action. It positions the filer not as a damaged, emotional victim seeking personal restitution, but as an anonymous corporate whistleblower exposing a theft of interstate commerce. To execute this maneuver, I required independent counsel. I needed a lawyer who possessed the vast resources to file federal injunctions and the distinct personal motivation to see Harrison Croft destroyed. I found him the following morning in the heart of downtown Birmingham. David Montgomery operated a prominent high-rise litigation firm. He was also the incumbent state senator Harrison intended to unseat in the upcoming election. Montgomery cultivated a reputation for ruthless efficiency and a deep, unhidden disdain for my brother-in-law. He despised the way Harrison bought his way into the political elite using manufactured charm. I walked into his corporate lobby without an appointment. The receptionist attempted to block my entry, reciting a rehearsed script regarding scheduling availability. I handed her a sealed envelope containing a printed photograph of Harrison's forged campaign incorporation documents. I instructed her to deliver it to her boss and tell him the sender possessed the original files. 4 minutes later, the heavy frosted glass doors to the inner sanctum swung open. David Montgomery stood in the threshold. He wore a sharp navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. He stared at me with a mixture of profound shock and calculated curiosity. He recognized my face from the tragic news broadcasts Harrison orchestrated 6 months prior. He ushered me into his spacious corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. I sat in a high-back leather chair across from him. The smooth slide of a sleek manila folder across the polished mahogany desk broke the tense silence. The folder contained everything. The extracted medical examiner correspondence, the shell company ledgers routing the insurance payout, the digital audio transcript of Nolan sobbing on the patio, confessing to the drunken hit and run. Montgomery opened the file. He read the first 3 pages without speaking. The seasoned politician recognized a thermonuclear political weapon the moment it landed on his desk. He looked up, his eyes scanning my face, searching for the cognitive damage Harrison had whispered about at recent donor dinners. "You are supposed to be resting in a highly exclusive family mausoleum," Montgomery noted. His voice carried the deep, gravelly tone of a lifelong smoker. "My family encountered a clerical error regarding my mortality." I replied, keeping my posture rigid and my tone strictly professional. "I am here to correct the ledger." I outlined the legal strategy without a single tremor in my voice. We skip the local authorities, we bypass the probate judges, we file the qui tam lawsuit directly with the federal court district. We hand the insurance fraud, the wire fraud, and the forged death certificate to the federal authorities on a silver platter. Montgomery leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers together. Filing a federal whistleblower claim triggers an immediate, automatic freeze on all connected assets, he explained, studying my expression. The campaign funds, the primary Mountain Brook estate, the retail boutique downtown. The federal government locks down every single bank account tied to these routing numbers until the investigation concludes. Harrison will not be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone fund a senatorial race. That is the primary objective, I stated. I reached into my pocket and retrieved the black, encrypted USB token. I placed it on the mahogany desk right next to the manila folder. This drive contains the authorization codes to release the restricted offshore records, validating the exact origin of the stolen capital. It provides the concrete financial proof you need to request the emergency federal injunction today. Montgomery stared at the small digital key. He recognized the magnitude of the transaction. He was not just eliminating a political rival. He was watching a woman orchestrate the precise clinical dismantling of her own bloodline. Most people in your position would seek an emotional confrontation, he observed, tapping his index finger against the wooden surface. They would want a dramatic public apology. They would want to see their mother cry and beg for forgiveness. Emotions are an unpredictable liability, I explained. They cloud logical judgment and provide the opponent with psychological leverage. I do not care about apologies. Apologies do not balance a fraudulent ledger. I only care about the math. The math is undeniable, and it does not negotiate. Montgomery smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression. He picked up his desk phone and summoned his senior paralegals. The legal machinery hummed to life. For the next 6 hours, I sat in the corner of his secure conference room, providing clinical testimony to build the federal affidavit. I separated my trauma from the raw data. I did not shed a single tear when describing the dark trunk of the car. I did not flinch when detailing the burned stranger sitting in my mother's brass urn. I treated my own attempted murder as a series of highly unfavorable corporate transactions. By late afternoon, the lawsuit was filed under a sealed federal docket. The trap was legally perfectly set. The wheels of federal jurisdiction began turning, grinding forward with unstoppable bureaucratic momentum. The government auditors would officially notify the banks by tomorrow morning. Warrants would follow shortly after. But I did not want Harrison or Vivian to learn about their destruction through a generic banking notification or a quiet knock on the door from a federal agent. I wanted to deliver the invoice personally. Tomorrow evening, Harrison planned to host his grand senatorial campaign launch gala. It was a black tie event scheduled at a premium downtown ballroom. He invited the political elite, the wealthy donors, and the local press to witness his ascension. He intended to stand on a stage funded by my spilled blood and declare himself a champion of justice and family values. I looked out the high-rise window, watching the sun dip below the Birmingham skyline, casting long, dark shadows over the city. I had my tailored suit. I had my undeniable federal injunction. The ghost was finally ready to attend the party. The crystal chandeliers of the downtown grand ballroom cast a warm golden light over the assembled political elite of Birmingham. Standing in the carpeted foyer, I listened to the muffled hum of the gala bleeding through the heavy double doors. The sound was a specific symphony composed of clinking champagne flutes, hushed laughter, and the rustle of expensive silk. This was the pinnacle of Mountain Brook High Society. A ticket to this event cost $2,000 a plate. Every judge, corporate executive, and local media anchor occupied a seat inside, waiting to coronate the next state senator. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal blazer. I checked the reflection in the polished brass door handle. The frightened ghost wearing charity bin sweatpants no longer existed. The woman staring back at me possessed cold eyes and a flawless posture. I was the architect of the impending ruin. Through the acoustic dampening of the doors, I heard the distinct baritone voice of my brother-in-law echoing over the primary sound system. Harrison was delivering his keynote address. We gather tonight not just to launch a campaign, but to celebrate the enduring strength of the family unit, he declared, his tone vibrating with manufactured passion. This year, my own household faced a profound tragedy. We lost a brilliant light. We learned that the bonds of family must withstand the darkest storms. We learned to lean on each other, to find hope in the ashes of grief. His words dripped with calculated political poison. He was utilizing my forged death certificate as a foundational pillar for his platform, selling a narrative of resilient mourning to secure campaign donations. I reached out and placed my hands on the brass handles. I pushed the heavy doors open. The hinges yielded silently, but the shift in air pressure drew the attention of the event staff standing near the entrance. A waiter holding a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres turned toward me. His eyes widened. He recognized my face from the tragic news reports Harrison had broadcasted 6 months ago. The waiter froze, his hands trembling. A single crystal glass tipped over, spilling expensive champagne across the silver tray. The sharp, shattering sound of the glass hitting the floor acted like a physical shockwave. The people sitting at the rear tables turned to investigate the noise. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The sudden silence spread forward through the vast ballroom, moving like a fast, creeping frost. One by one, the wealthy donors stopped talking. The clinking of crystal flutes ceased entirely. The string quartet positioned near the stage faltered, the cellist dropping his bow with a discordant scrape. I stepped into the room. I walked down the center aisle, navigating the narrow space between the circular banquet tables. I did not rush. My sensible leather shoes produced a steady, measured rhythm against the hardwood floor. Whispers erupted around me, frantic and confused. Guests leaned away as I passed their faces, registering a profound, terrifying dissonance. The deceased sister, the tragic hit-and-run victim, the cornerstone of the candidate's moving speech, was currently strolling toward the podium. I kept my gaze locked straight ahead, focusing entirely on the illuminated stage. Harrison stood behind a clear acrylic lectern. His hands gripped the edges of the podium so tightly, his knuckles turned stark white. The manufactured political passion evaporated from his face, replaced by raw, unfiltered terror. The words died in his throat. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, hollow rasp emerged. The microphone amplified his panicked breathing, broadcasting it to the silent, bewildered audience. To his left, Beatrice sat in a high-backed chair. She wore a stunning emerald evening gown, a visual testament to her newly established boutique wealth. When she saw me walking down the aisle, all the color drained from her skin. She raised a shaking hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. The delusion of her legitimate business empire collapsed in real time. She recognized that the woman approaching the stage represented a walking federal indictment. To his right, Vivian occupied the seat of honor. My mother wore a regal silver dress, her posture rigid and perfect. She spent her entire life cultivating this exact moment, securing her position as the resilient matriarch of a powerful political dynasty. As I approached the front row, her pristine mask shattered. Her eyes darted wildly toward the exit doors, evaluating her escape routes. The aristocratic grace she wielded like a weapon melted into the panicked, frantic twitching of a trapped animal. I reached the front of the ballroom. A single, empty chair sat in the center of the first row, bearing a reserved placard decorated with the campaign logo. I turned, grabbed the edges of my charcoal blazer, and sat down. I crossed my legs, folded my hands in my lap, and stared directly up at Harrison. I did not shout. I did not scream accusations. I did not provide a dramatic explanation to the confused, murmuring crowd. I simply occupied my seat, offering a cold, clinical smile. The silence stretched into a suffocating, agonizing eternity. Harrison stared down at me, a drop of sweat tracing a path down his temple. He needed to speak, to control the narrative, to offer a plausible medical explanation for my miraculous return. But his brilliant legal mind short-circuited. Any explanation he offered would invite an immediate medical inquiry, unraveling the forged death certificate. He leaned toward the microphone, his lips parting. Before a single word materialized, the heavy double doors at the rear of the ballroom swung open for a second time. The synchronized heavy footfalls of distinct tactical boots echoed across the hardwood. A team of 8 federal agents strode into the gala. They did not wear tuxedos. They wore dark navy windbreakers bearing the stark yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They moved with a rigid, uncompromising authority, bypassing the panicked event security and marching directly down the center aisle. The local elite gasped. Chair legs scraped loudly against the floor as wealthy donors scrambled to distance themselves from the unfolding disaster. The quiet, elegant launch party mutated into a chaotic crime scene. The lead agent, a tall man with a severe expression, walked straight past my chair and ascended the short stairs to the stage. He did not care about the cameras flashing or the local journalists recording the event on their phones. He held a thick stack of folded documents in his right hand. Harrison Croft, the agent, stated, his voice projecting without the need for a microphone, "We are executing a federal search and seizure warrant authorized under the False Claims Act. Step away from the podium immediately." Harrison stumbled backward, his polished leather shoes slipping on the slick stage surface. "You have no jurisdiction here," he stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. "This is a private political event. I demand to speak with my counsel." "Your counsel will receive a copy of the federal indictment tomorrow morning," the agent replied, entirely unmoved by the bluster. Two junior agents stepped forward. They did not grab Harrison. They walked directly to the acrylic podium and seized the thick leather-bound campaign ledgers resting on the shelf. Another agent moved toward the back of the stage, unplugging the campaign manager's laptop and dropping it into a clear evidence bag. They were executing the financial freeze exactly as David Montgomery promised. The whistleblower filing, combined with the anonymous corporate audit, triggered a total lockdown. I watched the perspective shift across the stage. Beatrice buried her face in her hands, sobbing openly. Her emerald gown looked absurd and tragic under the harsh interrogation lights of the federal agents. She knew the boutique bank accounts were already locked. The lease, the inventory, the pristine glass storefront, every single asset was currently reverting to federal custody. Vivian stood up, her legs trembling. She attempted to summon her old authority, lifting her chin and glaring at the lead agent. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded, her voice shrill and desperate. "You are ruining a private family gathering." The agent glanced at her, consulting a sheet of paper. "Vivian Smith," he read aloud. "Your primary residential estate in Mountain Brook is currently being secured by a secondary tactical team. You are barred from entering the premises pending a forensic audit of your property tax records." The public humiliation struck her with the force of a physical blow. The wealthy donors, the country club friends, the rival socialites, they all watched as the untouchable Vivian Smith was declared homeless by a federal officer. The social standing she prioritized over her own daughter evaporated in a matter of seconds, leaving her isolated and despised. Harrison stood near the backdrop, staring down at me. The cameras continued to flash, capturing his ruined political career in high definition. He looked at my folded hands and the calm, detached expression on my face. The realization hit him with terrifying clarity. The sudden federal raid, the unsealed warrant, the exact timing of the disruption. He understood that the ghost sitting in the front row engineered every single moving part. I held his gaze. I did not offer a victorious sneer or a spiteful glare. I offered the flat, indifferent observation of an actuary watching a flawless algorithm execute its final command. The ledger was balancing itself. The stolen capital was returning to the firm. The liabilities were being liquidated. The equation possessed no remaining errors. The federal agents directed my family toward the side exit, guiding them away from the flashing cameras. I remained in my chair, listening to the frantic whispers of the ruined gala. The physical confrontation ended, but the grinding machinery of the legal system was just beginning its slow, devastating work. The morning after the gala, dawn broke over the Mountain Brook estate with a quiet, indifferent clarity. The humid Alabama air clung to the manicured lawns, but the pristine silence of the property carried a different texture. It was no longer the silence of exclusive wealth. It was the sterile silence of a crime scene. A dark sedan parked at the base of the long driveway. Two federal agents stepped onto the gravel, carrying clipboards and a roll of thick adhesive labels. They walked up the front steps, bypassing the manicured ivy and the dormant rose bushes. The lead agent peeled the waxy backing off a bright square decal. He pressed his palm against the heavy, custom mahogany front door, smoothing the paper flat against the expensive varnished wood. The sticker was stark, vivid red. The word "seized," printed in bold black letters, dominated the center of the warning. That single square of adhesive paper functioned as the ultimate period at the end of my family's aristocratic fiction. The physical asset was officially repossessed by the federal government, pending the conclusion of the fraud investigation. The immediate fallout from the ballroom raid was swift, but the true agony of the justice system resides in its relentless, grinding machinery. Cinematic portrayals suggest rapid resolutions and dramatic courtroom confessions. The reality is far more clinical. The legal process operates like a slow-moving glacier. It crushes everything in its path, utilizing thousands of pages of printed documents, sworn affidavits, and endless procedural hearings. I intentionally slowed my own rhythm to match this bureaucratic execution. I stepped back and allowed the financial autopsy to begin. 2 weeks after the raid, I sat in a windowless federal deposition room located in downtown Birmingham. The space smelled of stale filtered coffee and the faint ozone tang of a nearby photocopier. A long synthetic wood table divided the room. I sat on one side wearing a sharp, tailored suit, my posture straight and unwavering. Across from me sat Harrison's defense counsel, a sweating, frantic man named Davis, who charged $1,000 an hour to perform legal miracles. He possessed no miracles today. Davis attempted to rattle my composure. He deployed classic intimidation tactics, raising his voice, leaning across the table, and questioning my mental stability following the lengthy coma. He wanted an emotional reaction. He needed me to shout or cry or exhibit the erratic behavior of a traumatized victim so he could introduce doubt into the official transcript. I offered him nothing but raw, indisputable data. When he questioned the timeline of my awakening, I recited the exact shift schedules of the rural clinic nurses. When he challenged the origin of the offshore routing numbers, I provided the distinct cryptographic hash algorithms tying the shell corporations directly to his client's home network. I spoke with a quiet, icy precision. I did not blink when he raised his voice. I did not flinch when he slammed his hand against the table. I answered every single inquiry with a corresponding transaction date, a bank routing code, or a cited email transcript. The court reporter typed frantically, capturing the total dismantling of their defense. Davis eventually slumped back into his chair, loosening his tie. He looked at the thick stack of financial ledgers sitting in front of me and realized he possessed nothing to cross-examine. I proved in that sterile room that paper trails, undeniable math, and infinite patience are far more devastating weapons than any emotional screaming match. I stripped away their ability to manipulate the narrative. The consequences cascaded downward, hitting each conspirator with tailored precision. Harrison suffered the most poetic punishment. The State Bar Association convened an emergency disciplinary panel. They reviewed the forged death certificate, the purchased medical examiner reports, and the misappropriated campaign funds. They revoked his license to practice law, terminating his career in a single afternoon. But the federal authorities delivered the fatal strike. The United States attorney handed down a sprawling indictment charging my brother-in-law with wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Because he represented an extreme flight risk, the federal judge revoked his passport. The Internal Revenue Service flagged his Social Security number, freezing his remaining personal accounts. Harrison Croft became trapped in the exact bureaucratic nightmare he designed for me. He was legally paralyzed. He could not rent an apartment because he failed the background checks. He could not open a basic checking account because his financial profile triggered federal warning alerts. He could not board an airplane or cross a border. Stripped of his legal standing and his stolen wealth, he wandered the city as an untouchable outcast. He erased my existence to fund his ambition, and the system responded by erasing him. Beatrice experienced her own specific brand of ruin. The government auditors descended upon her downtown luxury boutique. The soft instrumental jazz no longer played through the hidden ceiling speakers. Instead, the harsh screech of packing tape echoed across the polished marble floors. Federal liquidators marched through the store, scanning barcodes and dropping expensive, handcrafted Italian leather goods into cheap cardboard shipping boxes. My sister stood on the sidewalk outside the pristine glass windows, stripped of her tailored crimson blazer. She watched as contractors unbolted the sleek gold letters of her namesake sign from the awning. The inventory was auctioned off to pay restitution to the life insurance firm. Her delusion of becoming a self-made corporate executive dissolved, leaving her with a staggering personal debt profile and the crushing reality of her own complicity. The weakest link in the chain broke exactly as my risk models predicted. Nolan did not possess the psychological fortitude to endure a lengthy federal trial. When the prosecutors played the covert audio recording of his tearful patio confession, the remaining shreds of his defiance evaporated. He sat in a cramped interrogation room, wearing a bright orange county jail jumpsuit, listening to his own voice detail the drunken hit and run. The district attorney offered a stark choice: stand trial for conspiracy to commit murder and face life in prison, or accept a plea bargain for vehicular manslaughter and accessory to fraud. Nolan traded his loyalty for a reduced sentence. He signed the confession formally implicating Harrison and Vivian in the cover-up. The heir to the Smith family legacy was remanded to a state penitentiary, trading his crystal bourbon glasses for a steel cell. Vivian endured the most profound social descent. The aristocratic matriarch lost the only currency she ever valued. When the federal agents secured the Mountain Brook estate, she was escorted off the property carrying a single standard suitcase. The county tax assessor unmasked her secret property debts, filing immediate public foreclosure notices. The country club board discreetly revoked her membership. The wealthy neighbors who once drank her expensive wine and praised her resilience suddenly stopped answering her phone calls. She discovered that her social standing was entirely transactional. Without the sprawling colonial mansion and the illusion of generational wealth, she was just an aging woman implicated in a gruesome federal crime. She relocated to an extended-stay motel on the industrial outskirts of Birmingham. The heavy brass urn containing the stranger's ashes was confiscated as forensic evidence, leaving her alone in a room featuring stained carpets and a flickering neon sign outside the window. She was left utterly penniless, counting spare change to operate the hallway vending machines. I observed the unspooling of their lives from a safe, calculated distance. I read the court dockets and reviewed the asset seizure reports with the detached satisfaction of a professional closing out a highly successful audit. The emotional wounds inflicted by their betrayal scarred over, replaced by a cold, impenetrable armor. They gambled my life to balance their books, and I utilized the federal government to collect the debt. The machinery of the law executed its final commands, leaving a landscape of ruined ambitions and empty bank accounts. The primary conflicts were resolved. The legal ledger was perfectly balanced. Yet one minor variable remained outstanding before I could permanently close the file. The court scheduled the final dissolution of the primary estate assets for the end of the month. Before the gavel struck a final time, I arranged a private meeting. I needed to look my mother in the eye one last time, not to seek closure, but to deliver the final receipt. The federal authorities granted me temporary access to the foreclosed Mountain Brook property 48 hours before the public auction. I drove my rental sedan through the open iron gates, navigating the curving gravel path one final time. The creeping ivy clinging to the brick facade already showed signs of neglect, turning brown and brittle at the edges. Without the daily attention of hired landscapers, nature was swiftly reclaiming the territory. A sprawling estate requires constant financial nourishment to survive. Cut off the funding, and the decay becomes visible almost immediately. I unlocked the heavy mahogany front door and pushed it open. The government liquidators had stripped the interior down to its structural skeleton. The vast foyer, once a pristine monument to generational prosperity, felt cavernous and dead. Faded rectangular shadows marred the expensive silk wallpaper, marking the exact spots where priceless oil paintings previously hung. The ornate crystal chandelier was gone, replaced by raw electrical wires dangling from the intricate ceiling medallion. I walked across the bare hardwood. My sensible leather shoes produced a sharp, hollow echo that bounced off the empty walls. During my childhood, this floor was covered by thick, imported Persian rugs. Those woven fibers muffled every footstep, ensuring the residents maintained a stifling, curated quiet. My mother detested unscripted noise. She engineered a domestic environment where children were paraded out during lavish dinner parties to display high academic achievements before being silently ushered back to their rooms. The rugs absorbed the reality of our dysfunctional household, preserving the illusion of aristocratic perfection. Now the silence felt different. It was not cultivated by wealth. It was the barren echo of total ruin. Through the sheer curtains of the front window, I watched a yellow taxi pull into the circular driveway. The idling engine rattled coughing dark exhaust into the humid summer air. The passenger door swung open. Vivian emerged from the back seat. The physical toll of the federal indictment and the ensuing social exile was staggering. The regal matriarch who commanded charity galas and intimidated local politicians no longer existed. Her silver hair lacked its usual immaculate volume, pulled back into a severe practical knot. She wore a faded beige trench coat over unremarkable slacks. She carried a scuffed vinyl handbag instead of a bespoke leather purse. Her shoulders slumped, curving inward under the invisible weight of profound disgrace. She walked up the stone steps and stepped over the threshold. Her cheap, rubber-soled flats squeaked faintly against the varnished wood. She looked around the barren foyer, her eyes tracking the missing artwork and the absent antique console tables. The physical loss of her curated museum struck her with fresh impact, and her lower lip began to tremble. "You came," she whispered. Her voice sounded thin and raspy, stripped of its usual honeyed authority. "I granted the meeting because a completed audit requires a final signature." I replied, keeping my tone flat and unreadable. "The property is scheduled for auction on Friday. The federal agents will permanently lock the gates this evening." Vivian closed her eyes, taking a shaky breath. The scent of her expensive imported perfume was gone, replaced by the sterile aroma of generic motel soap. She wrapped her arms around her torso, shivering despite the sweltering heat radiating through the glass windows. "I do not know how to live like this," she confessed, staring at the faded rectangles on the wallpaper. "I sit in a miserable room next to a highway, watching the headlights cast shadows on the ceiling. My friends block my phone number. The grocer down the street pretends he does not recognize me. I lost everything, Abigail. My home, my reputation. My son is sitting in a county jail cell." "You lost the assets tied to a fraudulent incorporation," I corrected her. "The government simply repossessed the capital you stole. It is a standard recovery procedure." She snapped her head toward me, her eyes brimming with sudden, desperate tears. "How can you speak like that?" she cried, her voice echoing shrilly in the empty foyer. "Like a machine reading a spreadsheet. I am your mother. We share the same flesh. How could you orchestrate this nightmare? How could you destroy your own blood?" She deployed her final weapon, the weapon of maternal guilt. For 34 years, she utilized that exact tactic to control my behavior, to force my compliance at social events, and to extract my financial assistance when her secret debts mounted. She expected the sight of her weeping in a ruined house to crack my clinical armor. She wanted me to feel the crushing weight of a daughter betraying her lineage. I looked at her trembling hands and her tear-streaked face. I searched my internal emotional registry, expecting to find a flicker of pity, a spark of residual anger, or perhaps a brief twinge of regret. I found nothing. The psychological landscape within my chest was a vast, frozen tundra. The realization was liberating. I did not care about her suffering. I did not care about her motel room or her ruined social standing. The transaction was over. "I did not destroy you," I stated, delivering the words with a calm, devastating logic. "I corrected an accounting error. You balanced your books using my life. I balanced them back." Vivian stumbled backward as if I had struck her across the face. She leaned against the doorframe, gasping for air. "You priced my existence at $2 million. I continued pacing slowly across the hardwood. "You watched Harrison throw my bleeding, unconscious body into the trunk of a car. You helped him purchase a burned stranger to fill the brass urn sitting on your mantelpiece. You traded my future for property tax settlements and campaign funds. Blood is a biological technicality. It does not excuse theft, and it certainly does not excuse attempted murder." "I raised you," she sobbed, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I sat by your bed when you had a childhood fever. I clothed you. You hired a night nurse to administer the antibiotics while you attended country club galas." I corrected her, retrieving the factual data from my memory. You purchased expensive clothing because a poorly dressed child reflected negatively on your social image. Your love was never maternal, Vivian. It was purely transactional. You evaluated your children based on their utility. Nolan was a liability. Beatrice was a prop. I was an ATM. She slid down the doorframe, her knees buckling, until she collapsed onto the bare floor. The former queen of Mountain Brook, reduced to a weeping heap on the varnished wood. She covered her face, weeping loudly, the sound echoing off the high ceiling. "Please, Abigail," she begged, her voice muffled by her palms. "I am sorry. I was terrified of losing the house. Harrison told us it was the only way to save the family. I am begging you. Talk to the federal prosecutor. Tell them I was coerced. Tell them I was a victim too. I need your forgiveness." I stood over her, looking down at the scuffed vinyl handbag resting near her knees. Forgiveness implies a restoration of trust. I explained maintaining my icy detachment. Anger implies a lingering emotional investment. I refuse to grant you either. I do not hate you, Vivian. I simply feel nothing for you at all. You are a closed account, a zeroed balance. She looked up, her eyes wide and horrified. The ultimate punishment was not the loss of her wealth or the threat of a prison sentence. The ultimate punishment was my total indifference. She recognized that she possessed zero leverage. The daughter she attempted to discard had evolved into an untouchable force, severing the emotional tether permanently. I checked the silver watch on my wrist. "The allotted time is over," I announced. "The government contractors are arriving in 10 minutes to secure the locks. You need to return to your taxi." Vivian did not argue. The definitive finality in my voice stripped away her remaining resistance. She gathered her cheap handbag and pushed herself up from the floor. She wiped her face, attempting to salvage a microscopic fraction of her ruined dignity. She did not say goodbye. She turned and walked out the heavy front door, her rubber shoes squeaking down the stone steps. I watched the yellow taxi reverse out of the driveway and disappear down the tree-lined street. The heavy, oppressive weight I carried since the moment I woke up in that rural clinic vanished entirely. The need for familial validation, the lingering desire to belong to a household that never valued me, it all evaporated into the humid summer air. The emotional ledger was permanently closed. The toxic tether was cut. I turned away from the empty foyer, ready to execute the final phase of my strategy. The federal auction was approaching, and I possessed a very specific purchase order to fulfill. The sharp strike of the auctioneer's gavel cracked through the stale air of the county courthouse. The sound echoed off the wood-paneled walls, signaling the formal transfer of power. I sat in the back row of the public gallery, watching the proceedings with detached professional interest. Dust motes danced in the slanted shafts of afternoon light, filtering through the high arched windows. The federal government moves with methodical precision when liquidating seized assets, and I was there to close the final open account. The financial landscape of my life shifted dramatically over the past month. The insurance underwriter reclaimed their stolen capital, utilizing the detailed evidence I provided. The federal prosecutors secured their indictments against my family. Because my whistleblower filing orchestrated the recovery of stolen interstate funds, the Department of Justice mandated a statutory reward. I received a percentage of the recovered capital under the False Claims Act. The deposit cleared my new secure banking accounts yesterday morning. It was not blood money. It was a pristine, legitimate payout earned through forensic accuracy and calculating patience. I possessed more liquid assets now than my family ever held in their secretive, over-leveraged accounts. The auctioneer adjusted his silver spectacles and announced the next lot. He read the legal description for the sprawling Mountain Brook estate. The starting bid reflected a steep, unprecedented discount. The property carried the distinct, heavy taint of public disgrace. The local elite filling the courthouse gallery kept their numbered paddles resting on their knees. The affluent developers and the wealthy neighbors wanted nothing to do with a mansion financed by a faked death and a federal felony. The stain of Harrison's indictment hovered over the listing like a toxic cloud. Social preservation outweighed real estate ambition in this zip code. I raised my white cardboard paddle. The crisp sound of the paper slicing through the air drew quiet gasps from the rows sitting ahead of me. The auctioneer paused, scanning the room for a counteroffer. The silence stretched, holding a thick, poetic tension. The local power brokers recognized my face. They turned in their wooden pews, watching the resurrected victim purchase her childhood prison. The gavel struck the wooden block a second time. Sold. I stood up and walked down the center aisle toward the clerk desk. I signed the digital transfer forms and authorized the wire payment. I acquired the sprawling colonial mansion for pennies on the dollar, buying the exact empire they tried to trade my life to protect. Later that afternoon, I stood on the sweeping front porch of my newly acquired property. The humid Alabama breeze rustled the overgrown ivy clinging to the brick exterior. I held the heavy paper deed in my right hand. The document bore my signature alone, establishing my absolute sovereignty over the territory. A cheap yellow taxi idled at the edge of the wrought iron gates. The federal marshals granted Vivian a final 15-minute window to retrieve a single cardboard box of exempt personal garments before the permanent security locks were engaged. She emerged from the side door, accompanied by a stoic, uniformed officer. She wore the same faded beige trench coat I saw at our final meeting. She clutched a small framed photograph to her chest, her knuckles white from the strain. Vivian stopped at the base of the stone steps looking up at me. We occupied the exact same physical space where she once commanded charity galas and directed a staff of invisible servants. The hierarchy was inverted permanently. I did not smile. I did not offer a victorious sneer or a gloating remark. I maintained a cold, expressionless gaze, looking down at her from the elevated porch. The sheer indifference in my posture served as the final, unappealable verdict. She lowered her head, unable to sustain the eye contact. She walked down the gravel driveway toward the idling taxi and climbed into the back seat. The engine rattled, coughing dark exhaust fumes as the vehicle pulled away, disappearing down the tree-lined street. She was a banished tenant, evicted from her own fiction, leaving behind the physical monument to her ruined legacy. The final variable required a different kind of physical closure. I left the estate and drove my rental sedan across town, navigating the winding roads leading to the local memorial park. The late afternoon sun cast long, angled shadows over the manicured green hills. I parked near the crest of a gentle ridge. The sweltering summer heat pressed against my shoulders as I walked toward the specific plot purchased by my brother-in-law 6 months ago. A shallow depression marked the earth where the heavy brass urn was exhumed by federal investigators earlier that week. The ashes of the unknown transient woman were transferred to a state medical facility for proper, respectful handling. She was a victim of circumstance, utilized as a prop in a wealthy family's scheme. I ensured the authorities would attempt to identify her and grant her a legitimate resting place. But the polished granite headstone remained anchored in the soil, waiting to be cleared. 2 groundskeepers wearing heavy canvas work pants and scuffed steel-toe boots stood over the marker. They held long iron crowbars and flat-bladed shovels. They wedged the forged iron tools beneath the thick granite slab, applying steady downward pressure. The mortar holding the stone to the concrete foundation cracked with a sharp, dry sound echoing across the quiet hills. The stone tilted backward, separating from the earth. I watched the engraved silver letters catch the fading sunlight. Abigail Smith, beloved daughter, brilliant mind. The fraudulent memorial was heavy, requiring both men to grunt with effort as they pushed it onto the back of a motorized utility cart. The stone landed against the metal bed with a dull, heavy thud. They wiped the sweat from their foreheads, nodded respectfully in my direction, and drove the cart down the paved path. They left behind an empty patch of raw, brown dirt. I stood at the edge of the hollow space looking down at the disturbed soil. The air was still thick with the scent of cut grass and warm earth. I survived a dark, rainy highway, a cinder block recovery ward, and a calculated execution ordered by my own bloodline. I dismantled a political campaign, a luxury retail front, and a generational legacy, using nothing but a stolen flash drive, an encrypted token, and an unyielding forensic patience. The profound, quiet peace of a perfectly balanced ledger settled deep within my chest. Every debt incurred on the night of the accident was collected with devastating interest. The liabilities were erased. The accounts were settled. I turned my back on the raw earth and walked down the gentle slope toward my vehicle. My sensible leather shoes left shallow footprints in the damp grass. I was walking away from the grave I refused to occupy. I was an untouchable force, a woman who survived the fire and bought the ashes. There is a specific kind of silence that settles over a perfectly manicured neighborhood just before dusk. It is the quiet hum of the American dream, a landscape defined by sharp green lawns, grand colonial facades, and the unspoken promise that prosperity equates to virtue. We are taught to look at the sprawling estates and the polished silver shining through the window panes and assume the people residing inside have mastered the art of living. But brick and mortar cannot feel, and a heavy mahogany door is just as effective at keeping the truth locked inside as it is at keeping the world out. The story of Abigail Smith and her family transcends a mere tale of betrayal. It serves as a profound, terrifying mirror held up to the darkest corners of family responsibility and the true cost of raising children. When we consider the vast responsibilities of parenting within a traditional family structure, we often focus on tangible provisions. We obsess over securing the best school districts, funding college accounts, and ensuring our children inherit the social advantages we may have lacked. This is a natural instinct woven deeply into the fabric of American culture. Yet Vivian Smith provided all the physical trappings of an elite upbringing while entirely neglecting the spiritual and emotional foundation required to build empathetic human beings. She engineered a domestic environment where affection functioned as a commodity, traded only when a child produced a desirable return on investment. This is the great peril of transactional parenting. When a mother evaluates her children based on their utility, viewing a son as a liability to be managed, one daughter as a decorative prop, and another as a walking financial reserve, she does not raise a cohesive family. She cultivates a boardroom of rivals. Children are remarkably perceptive creatures. They absorb the unspoken rules of their household long before they can articulate them. Abigail learned early on that her value was tied directly to her capacity to solve problems and generate wealth. Beatrice learned her worth was tethered entirely to her aesthetic presentation and her proximity to power. Nolan learned his weaknesses would be hidden, never healed, so long as he did not embarrass the bloodline. The absence of emotional awareness in a home creates a dangerous void, inevitably filled by paranoia and cold survivalism. A healthy family structure demands honesty, even when the truth is ugly, inconvenient, or deeply embarrassing. It requires a parent to look at a child's failure like a devastating gambling addiction and offer the difficult, unyielding boundaries of genuine help, rather than throwing money at the problem to protect the family name. Because Vivian and Harrison prioritized their pristine, aristocratic facade over raw, honest accountability, they laid the groundwork for their own destruction. They taught the children that the appearance of perfection carried far more weight than a human life. When the ultimate crisis arrived on a dark, rain-swept highway, the family did not react with the fierce protective instinct we expect from our kin. They reacted like shareholders managing a corporate liability. The hit and run was a tragedy, but the subsequent cover-up was the direct, inevitable harvest of decades of emotional rot. They threw a broken woman into the trunk of a car, not because they were born monsters, but because they had been conditioned from birth to believe that preserving their status justified any sacrifice. The life insurance policy was merely the final, gruesome dividend of a mother who forgot how to love without a ledger. The stark lesson here reaches far beyond the extremes of a criminal conspiracy. It asks us to examine the subtle, everyday accounting we perform in our own homes. How often do we prioritize a child's academic or athletic achievements over their character? How frequently do we sweep uncomfortable truths under the rug to maintain the illusion of a flawless household for the benefit of our neighbors? True family responsibility means cultivating an environment where fairness dictates every interaction. It means treating children as individuals deserving of unconditional support, not as extensions of our own egos or social ambitions. Fairness in parenting does not mean treating every child identically. It means providing each child with the specific emotional and moral guidance they require to become self-aware, accountable adults. It requires the courage to enforce consequences with grace, rather than hiding the stakes out of pride. If Nolan had been held accountable for his reckless actions long before that fateful night, the tragedy might have been averted. If Beatrice had been taught that her value existed independently of a wealthy husband and a luxury boutique, she might not have shattered so easily under the weight of the truth. We share these narratives to illuminate the invisible cracks in our own foundations. We explore the shadows so we might better appreciate the necessity of the light. If you find yourself captivated by these deep dives into the human condition, by the intricate, sometimes terrifying dynamics of the families we are born into and the ones we choose to build, you are not alone. Welcome back to Edana Told Stories, where we unpack the quiet truths hiding behind closed doors. If this journey resonated with you, drop a comment sharing your thoughts and ensure you subscribe to the channel so we can continue unraveling these complex threads together. In the end, Abigail reclaimed her life, but the victory was a sterile one. She bought the sprawling colonial estate, but it was just an empty house echoing with the memories of people who never truly knew her. She balanced the account, leaving her family with nothing but the debts they had incurred in the dark. It is a chilling reminder that the wealth we accumulate and the status we project mean very little if the people sitting at our dinner table are quietly calculating the cost of our presence. As you walk through your own home tonight, listen to the quiet sounds of the people resting within its walls. Consider the bonds holding you together. Are they woven from the strong, enduring threads of honesty, emotional awareness, and unconditional grace? Or are they fragile strings, pulled tight by high expectations, hidden resentments, and unpaid emotional debts? The truth is rarely found in the polished brass urns or the manicured green lawns. The truth lives in the quiet, unseen moments when the doors are locked, the curtains are drawn, and the ledger is finally laid bare. We all build our own estates, constructing them day by day, choice by choice. The only question that remains is who or what will ultimately inherit the ashes.